Hello, faithful. Thank you for joining us here tonight on this impromptu live stream. Virgil and I had planned to come here today and talk about all kinds of various and sundry things and didn't really realize today was going to be the banner news day that it ultimately was. So we have a lot to cover.
I knew it would be, but...
Well, Virgil, you act like you're Nostradamus here, but you did get the prediction, the near tandem prediction, off by a few days.
Well, I got cocky there because I knew I was confident it would be pulled, but I didn't know when, and I wanted to, I wanted to flex a little bit. So, that's spiking it at the 1 yard line, I guess.
So, what was your prediction for today exactly?
That they would vote on the minimum wage thing, but I would not be, and that it would fail. But I did not think it would lose by the margin that it did. I did not think they would only get 42 votes for it.
Okay. I mean, David Sirota, who will be joining us a little bit later, makes the point that 42 votes would be enough to support Kamala Harris if she were to. Oh, where'd he go? Oh, there you go.
I'm trying to focus.
Okay.
It needs to shut and go on again. It's
okay. If Biden were to support her in overturning the parliamentarian. But before we get into that nitty gritty, we have our first guest waiting in the wings, a woman who was really on the forefront of the fight for 15, who secured it in Seattle and really pushed the conversation nationally, and who has been on Bad Faith podcast and talked about the strategic options, the kind of extra procedural, more revolutionary strategic options when we're in positions like this. So I'm so glad to have her with us tonight to talk through kind of where we are as a movement. Please welcome Seattle City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. Hello and welcome.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you both again.
Nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. I wish it were under better circumstances. Can you help us all understand how we should be feeling in this moment? Because I think a lot of folks are feeling like it's over, right? This $15 minimum wage was one of the few concrete progressive promises that Joe Biden didn't seem to be equivocating about, that he really sold Americans on as he was trying to get progressive to fall in line, and all Democrats, frankly, to fall in line and vote for him in the general election. And now it feels to a lot of us that because of his behavior leading up into the vote, that he wasn't really ever fully invested in passing a $15 minimum wage to begin with. There didn't seem to be a lot of lobbying on Kyrsten Sinema or Joe Manchin. He was talking a week before the parliamentarians ruling about how the parliamentarian probably wasn't going to rule in his favor. He started his administration talking all about bipartisanship, which seemed to be, in retrospect, a signal that says, we don't have any interest in pushing anything through or advocating for anything. We're going to use bipartisanship as a cover for why we're not going to get anything done. So how should we be feeling about this moment as progressives who understand the core central importance of something like a $15 minimum wage?
I think the bottom line is we should not lose hope, because we are in such an incredible period where look at the pressure there is on the Democratic establishment right now. Yes, there will be setbacks, and these are opportunities for us to understand what strategy the left and progressive movement need to have. But at this moment, there is the pressure that is on the Democratic Party. That to us is an indication of the higher consciousness. Working people are actually looking at this and trying to understand, why is it, as you were saying, Brianna, why is it that the Democrats can't deliver? And I think it's our job, it's our responsibility to point out that or reject this whole idea that Biden is putting forward that, it was the parliamentarian. I mean, it's suddenly the all-powerful President Biden and the all-powerful Vice President Harris, they're suddenly now powerless in front of the parliamentarian, something that we had not even heard existed until a few days ago. As far as I knew, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a parliamentarian, So people are not buying it. I mean, obviously, people are thinking about, okay, what is it? What is going on here? I mean, this is a referee with no binding authority. And there's this trick question that the Democratic establishment is using to fool working people. How many votes do we need to override the parliamentarian? I mean, this is nonsense. No votes. Kamala Harris can say the word and do it. So first of all, our job is to point out this whole game of smoke and mirrors that they are playing in order to dodge their responsibility for $15 an hour. And it also should be pointed out, I mean, it's not even like they waited for someone like Manchin to remove the $15 aspect from the feature from the bill. It actually, Schumer took it out of the Senate bill. Schumer and other Democrats. I mean, it's like they're doing the job for the big business establishment. And so our question is, Joe Manchin is going to the mat for the class he represents, which is big business, the ruling class, Wall Street. So we have to go to the mat for our needs as well. And so the point here is, and here is again another bottom line, Democrats have the House, the Senate, the White House. They were elected with the hope that they'd represent working people. Instead, they're immediately bending to big business in all key issues. And you can see how Biden and the establishment will use procedure and rules and decorum and all of that to, and people like Joe Manchin, like we can't do anything now, there's Joe Manchin. They will use all of this to throw up their hands and say, we can't do anything. But our job now is to point out, are they going to do this again and again and again? Is that how we are going to let this play out on issue after issue? Manchin's one vote will be the excuse. Some parliamentary rule will be another excuse. And so at this moment, I would say like the squad, I mean, there's no better time than now for the squad to leverage the numerical balance of power they have, because the stimulus bill is a must-pass bill. This is the moment to really leverage the position that they have in terms of their votes, because their numbers, the squad numbers have increased. They should make it crystal clear they won't vote for the stimulus bill that does not include 15. And here is why 15 has stymied at the federal level and why we won it in Seattle. It's not a local versus federal. I mean, that is all nonsense. It all comes down to a strategy question. What strategy did we use? And that is what the bottom line is. So what the squad should do is declare using their numerical balance of power, but empower themselves with the millions that will come and have their back. Call for rallies, town halls, mass conferences to back them up this weekend.
So this feels a little familiar, I gotta say. This is a conversation we've been having for a couple of months about the ability of House members in particular, because of the narrow margins there, to use their voting bloc to force concessions from mainstream Democrats the same way that we've seen the right-wing members of the House and the Senate do since time immemorial. But this seems to be the central conflict. You are upset. I am upset. Virgil's upset. We're all outraged here. But when I key into what a different part of Twitter is saying, what liberal Twitter seems to think is that, look, this is a must-pass bill. Therefore, we must pass it. Nobody on the left should be making any noise. And we'll just have another bite at the apple down the road the next time reconciliation is up at the end of the year. And what they seem not to understand, and which I think is being very purposefully put out there, is that there is a genuine opportunity at the next bite of the apple, that the pressures that exist today against a $15 minimum wage will somehow be gone, like that we will have more leverage instead of less at the end of the year. And so I think that part of what we have to get past is this idea that because Democrats are like, we frame ourselves as like being good people and like wanting the good stuff in the COVID bill to pass, we act as though we're the ones causing the trouble, as opposed to being the ones that are trying to push through an overwhelmingly popular policy. We talk about withholding our vote until the good thing, the popular thing passes, as though it's going to be detrimental to the Democrats' electoral chances and their political capital, instead of framing the conversation about why withholding of overwhelmingly popular policies that are popular in West Virginia and Arizona aren't detrimental to the political prospects of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Why is it that Democrats act as though they're afraid of their shadow when fighting for things that literally everybody everybody in a bipartisan manner actually want?
I think it sort of everything you said, Brianna, it really points to a fascinating reality about where the Democratic Party is right now, especially given the heightened consciousness of ordinary people, especially young people who are actually looking for a real change in our society, which is precisely what's putting pressure on the Democratic Party. Is that on the one hand, you have the stalwarts of the Democratic establishment who genuinely represent the interest of big business. They don't make any bones about it. I mean, Nancy Pelosi even said at some points, recently, remember, she said something like, well, US is capitalist, like she embraces the class that she's fighting for, and she does it unabashedly. And then you have the progressives, especially the squad. You have, and of course you have Bernie Sanders, who I believe are genuinely trying to do something for the people that they represent, ordinary people, working people, the marginalized. But the catch is in the question of how are they actually going to challenge the Democratic establishment. And I think, in terms of what you said about, people pushing back against us, saying, well, now is not the right time. There'll be another bite at the apple. Well, remember what they were saying when we were arguing that when a section of the left was saying, yes, absolutely, there is an opportunity instead of just voting for Pelosi as speaker, actually the squad should withhold the vote and use it as a moment to build real pressure for Medicare for all. But what we said, and at least what Socialist Alternative said, was that it's not just as some sort of drama, or sort of meaningless political theater, but to actually use the force the vote tactic in the context of helping to build mass rallies and conferences around Medicare for all. But at that time, AOC and also sections of DSA, they said that, well, this is not the moment to use your political capital. And in fact, I remember AOC in her response to force the vote, and I think she genuinely meant this. She said, instead of this, we should fight for something winnable, which is $15 an hour. Well, here we are talking about $15 an hour. And again, Biden, Harris, Schumer, Pelosi, all the stalwarts, big business stalwarts of the party are throwing excuse after excuse. It's the parliamentarian, it's the rules, it's the decorum, it's Joe Manchin. So I think what we have to point to is sort of the endless logic of making excuses for the Democratic establishment. So today it's this excuse, tomorrow it's another excuse. Yesterday it was Medicare for all, today it's $15 an hour. This is a failed strategy. I think that's what we need to point out. It's not so much about whether AOC is genuine or not. The question is the strategy of not being willing to go into open combat against the establishment, is that working or not? And it's clearly not working. And of course, right now we are talking about what the squad should do. And I hope they're having a meeting right now about how they're going to withhold their vote and reject the gaslighting against them that they are somehow holding anything up. They're not holding anything up. It's big business Democrats and the Republicans who are holding things up for anything for working people. And I hope that they're having that strategy discussion this weekend. And no doubt millions of people, including me, we will back them up if they show that political courage. But this question should have been, the strategy question doesn't come at the last second. It comes from the very beginning, like from the very beginning, what is your strategy? So in other words, weeks ago, we were saying, Socialist Alternative was saying that actually the squad and the progressives, what they should be doing is putting full frontal pressure on Manchin, Sinema, and also Biden and Schumer and Harris by holding rallies in West Virginia, in Arizona, in Georgia. These states are key states, obviously West Virginia and Arizona, because Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are from there. But Georgia is important too. The Black working class vote in Georgia was mobilized to a historic degree on the promise that you vote for the Democrats, we've got your back. Well, they don't have your back. So mobilize the millions of people who will stand with you. I think that's where the crux of the question lies. The left inside the Democratic Party, the squad needs to use that strategy.
And building on the question that's on the screen right now, Seattle, as you came on our program and you told us, Seattle was the first large city to pass a $15 minimum wage, and you were a leader in that fight. What lessons can we take from that? If you can walk through, obviously, that's very different political situation than local level versus the federal level, but I'm curious what parallels there are.
Oh, there are many parallels, and in fact, as I was saying earlier, I'm strenuously trying to help people understand that this is not about local versus national. It's not the size of the whatever question region we're talking about that makes a difference. I mean, a lot of people on the left will say, well, in Seattle it worked because it's Seattle. You can do great progressive things locally. The establishment will leave you alone. Well, they're not leaving us alone. We have a recall campaign against us right now from big business and the Democratic establishment and the right wing. No, we should expect, when working people fight for their needs in this deeply unjust system, and especially if we succeed in building movements and on top of that winning victories, we should expect them to retaliate against us. So that's no different whether it's Seattle or Washington, D.C. for a federal $15 minimum wage. And the only way we were able to win in Seattle and make Seattle the first major city was because we used what I would call a socialist strategy. And that was a strategy of being very clear from day one that the Democrats on the city council are not your friends, and your job is not to try and make negotiations with them. So in other words, and this is an important distinction. It's between the squad and somebody like Chuck Schumer or Joe Manchin, in the sense that the squad genuinely don't represent big business interests. Big business is not under any illusions that they represent them.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's not enough. It doesn't matter how genuine you are. It's not enough to be genuinely for working people, genuinely support and write op-eds and tweet out about Medicare for all, $15 an hour. When you have that position, you have to do a little bit more. And that little bit more is what's decisive in whether you win or lose. And that little bit more is what takes the most courage, and it also takes political organizing. It takes your own movement. You need your own movement with you, which is to put a spotlight on all the Democrats who are betraying working people's interest in a way that they will absolutely not appreciate. They will attack you. They will say you're not being nice. The Democrats on the city council say all kinds of things about me, about how I'm not a nice person, how I'm odious. But I think,
odious.
Yeah. Even the Seattle Times said that about me, that I'm odious.
It's such like a Dickensian thing to say.
It does. And that's you're exactly right. It's not like 21st century in one of the metropolitan areas in the Western world, But that's my point. The point is that actually, if you're not making them that angry, then you're falling short of that little bit more that you need to do. But that little bit more is going to be absolutely decisive. And this is crucial. And this is what I mean by the socialist strategy, which is that you call out the Democrats who are failing, and not just in general, but by name. You say this person is betraying the working class. This other person is betraying the working class. But in addition to that, also building your own movement. So it's not a movement in a loose sense. It's not simply the hundreds of thousands of people who have gone out campaigning for AOC and others, correctly so for their election campaigns. It's much more concrete than that. So in Seattle, we wouldn't have won if Socialist Alternative had not won our city council seat. We would not have won if, using that Socialist council seat, we had not launched the 15 Now movement. And that 15 Now movement included hundreds and thousands of ordinary people and rank and file of the labor movement, some progressive unions. And we had the courage, but more so the political clarity to understand that our challenge was not only overcoming the obviously corporate politicians, which we obviously did when we won, but in order to win, we had also to go up against and overcome in a skillful way the cautious instincts of the well-meaning Democrats and the cautious instincts of some of the labor leaders who did not want an open clash with big business. And this is where, this is the crucial point of departure between many of the left in Congress and what we did in Seattle. It's because we did that we won.
So I hear a lot of people say things like, you can't just be invested in politics during campaign cycles. You're overly committed to electoralism. I think, great. Here's a moment where we're talking about doing something different. So what kinds of action in this moment do you think could be influential, either to pressure our progressives in Congress to hold out, to withhold the vote, whatever you want to call it, or to put enough pressure on the conservative wing of the Democratic Party, the Mantons and the Cinemas of the world, to feel like the electoral cost falls squarely on their shoulders in their states?
I think that's a very important and very concrete question. I think it will require, I mean, short of the squad members and Bernie Sanders themselves deciding that they can do this, and they can do this, they have this being mobilizing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people nationwide, and especially in key states. They can do this because they have a national platform. That's what we did at the Seattle level, because we have a platform here in Seattle. But short of them doing this, I think really there's a crucial. I mean, this weekend could potentially be historic if a section of the labor leadership decided to take this up. You know, if Unite Here and the nurses union and other unions who have done tremendous work, you know, and the teachers unions throughout the nation, have done tremendous work fighting for the needs of workers and their community members. I think there's real potential. I think their rank and file will be fired up to carry out these actions. So what it would take is some kind of strategic organizing conference immediately, where we could target a few. We can't do it everywhere well in over a weekend. It's a very short timeline right now. So we should. It would be good if large labor organizations who will have the organizational resources, they should put in their political might as well. So that's why it's not just about having organizational resources. It's about having the political clarity that this is what you can do with your organizational resources. And it is possible to do it. I'm not necessarily expecting that it will happen, I'll be honest, but it's something that we should put out there. And if it happens, that will be fantastic. We will, of course, Socialist Alternative and I will be wholeheartedly supporting it. And on the same lines, if we don't win this 15 fight, which is probably the most likely thing, then we have to actually continue building struggles. We cannot afford to get depressed or demoralized. For one, if the unionizing struggle in Bessemer, Alabama succeeds, that could potentially be a game changer. So it's also a reminder that ordinary people want to fight back. It's a question of providing the leadership, and that's what's missing.
Well, I'm curious because I know I saw the news that you are joining DSA, and I, as a DSA member, am in the process of trying to join the Socialist Alternative. It's a little harder to join the Socialist Alternative than it is DSA.
You two should have talked before this.
I mean, we're both going to be in both. I mean, ostensibly, if I get it. So I'm curious, what to you, if you have any insight into some of the strategic differences between the organizations, because I know that Socialist Alternative can. What I've learned through talking with members is that there's this feeling that despite being much smaller, that you've been able to achieve really substantial gains because of a difference in strategy and what is attributed to a willingness to be more aggressive and targeted and to take on a leadership role, as opposed to, I think, what is a good well-intentioned, but sometimes unproductive desire to say, I don't want to talk for anybody. I don't want to speak for anybody. I want there to be, I'm not making the decision. And then sometimes things never get rolling and decisions never get done. Can you talk about what you think those strategic differences are with Socialist Alternative?
Yes, that's a very important question. And yes, Brianna, you correctly described the difference between DSA and Socialist Alternative. Obviously, as we all know, there is a long history of multi-tendency organizations in the socialist movement, both here in the US and internationally. And right now, DSA is very important because it's now the second largest socialist organization in US history. And right now, it's the largest socialist organization. It is the expression of what we would call big tent socialism, in which there are different political trends, and some of them will probably very strongly agree with Socialist Alternatives' positions on lots of things. Some of them may agree with parts of it, but not others, and some of them may diverge quite dramatically from what we represent. But Socialist Alternative, as you pointed out, is different in the sense that we are an explicitly revolutionary, internationalist, and Marxist organization. And we are also part of an international called International Socialist Alternative, because we believe that the international working class needs to be cohesively organized to fight global capitalism. But the point is that we believe that the socialist movement needs both these kinds of organizations. So we are not doing an either or between socialist and alternative and DSA. So as you know, and as you said, I am a member of Socialist Alternative and of DSA. If you join Socialist Alternative, you will be a member of Socialist Alternative and DSA. And that doesn't necessarily present any kind of conflict and in fact, it is a positive thing. And some of our other SA members are also joining DSA. Not all of SA is joining DSA. But the reason that some of us are joining is because there are important debates taking place right now in Seattle DSA, nationally as well, in various DSA branches. And that's where it is so critical for us to bring Marxist ideas. And it goes exactly to the point you just made, Brianna, where sections of the left, and especially socialist left and DSA, they're like, there's this kind of, I don't know what they consider it, humility or something, that, well, I'm not going to comment on this. All ideas are great. Let everybody do their own thing. We don't agree with that. No, we don't believe that all ideas work for the working class. And here's the thing. The reason we are, as you said, aggressive about arguing for our ideas, and we're not quiet by any means about it, is because we don't personalize it. We believe that it is crucial that the socialist left have very serious and respectful and patient debates and discussions amongst ourselves in our movement, attract more and more new young people. We don't want to be an echo chamber. That doesn't help. We need new people joining the ranks of the socialist movement to have debates, not navel-gazing kind of debates, but real debates on real questions. Like, what is the strategy to win 15? What is going to be the strategy to win a Green New Deal of jobs? What point should be putting forward for the working people in Texas who just were devastated in this, electricity nightmare that they experienced? What are the demands we will put forward? These are concrete questions. These are not abstract questions. And we need Marxists to be part of the debate. And it's exactly what you were saying. And I wanted to give a concrete example of what you were saying, Brianna, is that in Seattle DSA, for example, there has been, there's been a recent debate about there was a discussion recently and a vote on DSA's platform on what a socialist position on a Green New Deal should be. And unfortunately, some leaders of one of the caucuses in the organization argued against including a call for democratic public ownership of big energy corporations. I mean, that is a fundamental question for a fight against climate change. It is magical thinking for any of us if we believed that there is even an iota of hope of addressing climate change without working people taking the commanding heights of the energy companies, infrastructure, fossil fuel companies into democratic public ownership, because it's a non-starter. You cannot control what you don't own. And it's not a question of convincing the energy and fossil fuel barons to do the right thing. They know the science of climate change. They're not idiots. They have the IQ to understand it. The system does not have any incentives for them to move. So how long are we going to wait? The planet is in serious peril. And so this is an example of how it's a concrete question. Should a socialist organization reject something so fundamental as democratic public ownership of energy companies? And the reason I'm using this as an example and why Marxists need to actively start debates in DSA is because that whole thing got passed, the rejection of democratic public ownership passed without essentially much of a debate. It was SA members who maybe brought some points in, but the rest of the DSA exactly used the kind of position you described, like, well, all ideas are great. No, it's not great because it benefits the ruling class. It benefits the capitalists.
What I feel like often is that there's just such an enormous gap between the rhetoric we use, in particular, kind of the rhetoric that was very much popularized in the course of the Bernie campaign, right? Which brought a lot of folks to the left. So we would say things like, the world is ending. We only have 12 years at the time to, dramatically cut carbon emissions. This is our existential moment. 68,000 people die every year from a lack of health care. That is fundamentally unconscionable. All of this stuff. And then after Bernie was gone and there wasn't an obvious electoral way to get there, suddenly everyone just either stopped talking like that or, we'll say it, but it's like almost you're afraid to say it because you've gone back to feeling like you're a weird crunchy granola person if you still believe those things, because how are we gonna make it happen? And to me, it feels a little bit like a betrayal because I believed it and I felt very kind of ethically like kind of spiritually triggered by being able to talk that way about my politics. And I find it very difficult to just accept that because Biden is president, we aren't going to continue to fight for those priorities. Either we believed it and we're willing to do what it takes, or we're not, regardless of who's in office. And talking to Ro Khanna on a recent episode, I think it was Monday's episode, and hearing him kind of frame the limits of our politics as Joe Biden's, the limits of Joe Biden's politics, was a little demoralizing because, what happened to push him left? Right? Like the idea that Joe Biden doesn't like Medicare for all, so we're all just supposed to stop talking about it for 4 years, strikes me as, how can we have convinced people to be a part of this movement because we said all this stuff mattered? And then at the first sign of trouble, at least in the electoral sphere, we're like, oh, well, guess we'll try again down the line. Sorry, everyone of the 68,000 who dies from lack of healthcare in the interim.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just laughing because that's such a dead end strategy, and it's a never ending logic, right? It's an endless logic, right? Every time you can say, well, let's wait for the next opportunity that comes down the pike. This is not the right moment, but it's never going to be the right moment because anytime you talk about it, it requires actually going up against some really powerful forces, and it's, to some degree I do understand the kind of fear that people feel, the kind of uncertainty. It's daunting to do it, and I can certainly attest to it from personal experience. The pressure to conform in some shape or form is so real and so tremendous once you win an elected position that it is hard to break people away from it, not because they're not genuine, but because it's very hard for individuals to do it. And I think this is where the question you've asked brings up 2 points. One is, what is the approach towards organizing we need to have in general, and what are we going to need in order to do that organizing? One, I would say, is that we cannot just have election campaign organizing. We either win or lose elections for the working class, but then beyond that, we still have to fight. Like right now, we have to fight for $15 an hour. We have to fight for our needs. We have to fight to get the politicians to do the right thing. And that means that organizational forces that have the heft should really call for actions that can really mobilize ordinary people who are otherwise not in political action, but who could be won over. And in fact, right now a big challenge for the left is, 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. That's how real the threat of right populism is. We're going to have to win over a majority of them to working class politics, and in order for that, we will need a strategy. But that brings up another question, and that is of a new party, and that is why we don't believe that it can be done in the Democratic Party. The reason Ro Khanna and others, despite being genuine, are not going that extra mile that we're talking about is because at the end of the day, they are accepting the discipline of the Democratic Party because they don't see a way out of it. They have accepted that this is the best we can have. We cannot have an anti-capitalist approach, and we cannot have a viable third party, which is understandable because it is a daunting process. It's a daunting thought. However, it is, I think the intuition it's counterintuitive. The reality is exactly opposite. The hopes of transforming the Democratic Party into a working people's party is completely it's an exercise in futility. I mean, Nancy Pelosi will burn the party to the ground before she would let, and I'm not even joking, this is the truth, because the class interests are completely hostile to one another. They represent big business and the capitalist class. We represent the interests of working people. Never the twain shall meet. So in other words, yes, it's a question of political strategy and compromise and all of that. Of course, all that is necessary. But fundamentally, you cannot hope to make peace with politicians who represent an entirely opposite class. That is what it comes down to. And as long as they're not willing to challenge that, they're not going to be able to point towards a winning strategy. So it's whether it's you're inside the Democratic Party or you're fighting to build a new party, we will need a fighting strategy.
I think that's important for everyone to remember. And frankly, one of the warnings against falling in love with self-proclaimed progressive politicians that are thoroughly hostile to socialism, that are hostile to the principles that you've just laid out.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, Virgil, your point is important also, not only in electoral politics or, and when we win elected positions in legislative bodies, these questions of strategy and political courage are very much live for example, leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement. These are not elected positions, but these are movement leaders, elected leaders in the union movement. Union struggles can either have massive success or they can go down in setbacks, depending on what approach leaders use. So West Virginia teachers, rank and file leaders, the fighting strategy that they used, going up against their own union tops, that's crucial. That's what we need to point towards.
I'm going to bring in David Sirota, who's everybody here knows, friend of the show, longtime veteran reporter on the Hill, the mastermind behind the Daily Poster, former speechwriter for Bernie Sanders. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having my Friday night cocktail.
I'm about to join you in a second.
Yeah.
We all need to find our piece where we can.
Yeah,
but,
totally.
Kshama, I want to ask you, this question at the bottom, people, when you say, we need a new party, first I want to ask you, would it make a difference to you? Would you have more confidence in being able to work from the inside if folks like Bernie Sanders in the squad were, say, using Bernie Sanders' call list, it's his text list, to tell people to mobilize and to protest, in front of the Capitol, to protest in various, conservative Congress members' office, to protest in Arizona and in West Virginia the way that he's done before for other kinds of actions? And the second question is, this one below, when you say a new party, do you have something specific in mind?
Right. I'll try to remember the first question, and the second question is right there. Sorry, sometimes I can forget. I think that's a very interesting point, that if Bernie and the squad were using a fighting strategy, what would that mean? I think that it would be, before it became a question of whether we would support it or we would still argue for a new party, I think first it would create an immediate crisis inside the Democratic Party itself. It's almost like a situation of civil war where, where one section of the party is absolutely going in a different direction. And that's why I was trying to point out the difference between, Bernie and the squad, who are genuinely, and I really appreciate that what they're doing, which is really saying, we want $15 an hour, we want Medicare for all, firmly saying that, never changing their position. They're not selling out in that way. But what they're not doing is, and that's okay. I mean, the Democratic establishment, the very pro-corporate wing of the Democratic establishment, which really controls the party, they don't like what Bernie and the squad are doing. In fact, remember AOC in November in the New York Times, she said, which was it really spoke to me as well, even though I'm not a member of the Democratic Party, I know what she's talking about, which is that it really paints her. She almost considered dropping out of politics, the way some of the party leaders treat her, almost like she's the enemy of the party. So my point is that they already, whatever the squad is already doing, which I don't think is enough, that is not appreciated by the Democratic establishment. They don't like it, and they will internally, I'm sure AOC and the squad, as she was indicating, get a lot of hard time. It's not easy. It's not easy to even do that much what they are doing. However, while the Democratic establishment and the Pelosi-Schumer wing, while they, I'm sure, hate every minute of what AOC does, in a sense, it serves their purpose, because as long as you have a little bit of, genuine left inside the Democratic Party, it confuses people, because that's where people will be attracted towards that. And that serves the interests of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all of them, as long as ordinary people, a big section of ordinary people, feel like, well, this is our best option. So in that sense, I think they have a love-hate approach towards what AOC and Bernie are doing, because it kind of serves their purpose, but it's also annoying to them that they are doing this. But that's completely different. It's fundamentally different than if Bernie and AOC absolutely went to the mat and organized people. See, it's one thing to say yourself where you stand. It's quite another if you start organizing millions of people. That completely exposes the Democratic establishment in a way that it's not exposing them now. So it would be an explosive situation inside the Democratic Party itself, and it will pose a question of splitting.
Now, few people have written as much or as knowledgeable about those kind of internal pressures that you just described as David Sirota. So, Sirota, can you back us up a little bit and just like what happened today? Oh, we can't hear you, David.
Sorry about that. Boy, it's a kind of a 30-year story, so it didn't happen today, but obviously things did happen today. Essentially, the story is this. Joe Biden campaigned on a promise to raise the minimum wage to $15. The Democratic Party, people say it's a moribund party. It has no creativity. It's the place where ideas go to die. But actually, the Democratic Party has an amazing amount of creativity and innovation when it comes to coming up with ever more inventive ways to not do the things that it promises. I mean, really. I mean, no, we should actually recognize that as like an amazing thing. Like, we're talking about like Einstein level, Steve Jobs level creative, Picasso level creativity here in coming up with ever more elaborate ways to not do the simple things that it promised voters it would do. I mean, again, the 50,000 foot view here is Joe Biden promised a very wildly popular promise, $15 minimum wage. The party has the power to actually do that. The House actually passed it, and all of a sudden, I mean, at first I thought it was a joke. I mean, I legitimately thought it was a joke when they were like, actually, the reason we can't do it is the parliamentarian. I was like, that's a joke, right? Like that's God, that has to be a joke. That can't be real. Like that can't be a real thing. Like, because the parliamentarian is really a parliamentary advisor. That's like blaming your aide. It's like literally Chuck Schumer blaming his advisor. I can't do this because my advisor issued an opinion saying she doesn't think we should do this or whatever, right? So what happened today was that absurd, cartoonish, yet inventive and innovative rationale for not doing something was used as the rationale to take the House passed bill, rule the minimum wage out of order, which then forced Bernie Sanders to the only kind of tool in his toolbox as one senator. I shouldn't say it's the only one, but it's the first one. We can talk about another one that he could use that he didn't use. But the first tool in his toolbox was, I'm going to offer an amendment to say to this bill where the House bill has been stripped of the minimum wage. I'm going to offer an amendment adding the minimum wage increase back into the bill. And the Democratic chair, the party basically, Kamala Harris did not swoop in and use her power as the presiding officer of the Senate. So the de facto presiding officer of the Senate said that this is essentially out of order. The Republicans raised a point of order, which is a procedural motion against adding it back in, which means that Bernie would have needed 60 votes to waive those rules. And there was a vote about waiving those rules. So again, the vote wasn't actually about the minimum wage, although sort of symbolically it was, but it was, will we even allow the minimum wage, our central campaign promise, will we even allow it to have a real vote? And that was voted down. And 8 Senate Democrats joined with the Republicans to not even allow a full debate and straight up simple majority vote on the minimum wage. So that's what happened today.
Now, David, just to back up for a moment. So the bill that Bernie Sanders brought to the floor included the minimum wage provision, which was ruled out of order. Is that correct?
No, actually,
what happened, non-germane. If
we're getting really technical about it, what happened was the Senate majority leader took the House bill, which had the minimum wage in it, and essentially put on the floor what's known as a perfecting legislation. What it does is it made the House bill comport with the so-called Byrd rule, all the sort of arcane rules of the Senate about what you can include and what you can't include in budget bills. So Chuck Schumer basically put on the floor a bill that complied with the Byrd rule. And then Bernie basically said, hey, listen, in complying with the Byrd rule, you took out the minimum wage because the parliamentarian said that the minimum wage doesn't comport with the Byrd rule. So I'm offering an amendment to put it back in.
So they did not wait, hang on. They did, because to my knowledge, you put the bill that would not comply with the Byrd rule. The parliamentarian advises the presiding officer that, it doesn't comply with the Byrd rule, then the presiding officer, as we've been saying for the past few days, Kamala Harris can say, you know what? No, I think it does, and that's fine.
Right. I mean, look,
But they did not even get to that point.
Correct.
Because of the parliamentarians' advisory opinion that was made a few.
Well,
days ago.
actually, it's almost worse. So here's one scenario that could have happened. The House passes its bill with the minimum wage. The parliamentarian says the minimum wage does not comport with the Byrd rule. Chuck Schumer could have said, I'm putting my perfecting amendment down on the Senate, this sort of central, fixing this. This is the bill. And Chuck Schumer, am ignoring the parliamentarian by saying, I don't care. Like, we're keeping the minimum wage in. And then what would have happened is Lindsey Graham would have stood up on the floor and said, I raise a point of order on this piece of the bill, which I don't believe comports with the rules. And then the chair could have said, Lindsey Graham, shut up. Like, I don't care about it. But Kamala Harris could have been like, your point of order is not well heard. Then Lindsey Graham could have said, I disagree with Kamala Harris. I want a ruling. I want a Senate vote of what Kamala Harris just said. And they would have needed 60 votes to overturn Kamala Harris. And they wouldn't have had that. And the minimum wage could then have been kept in the underlying bill. That's a scenario that could have
That's what I'm
happened.
trying to get at.
That's not what happened.
That this began with a capitulation.
Correct.
Using the excuse of the parliamentarians.
Yes, what happened today was...
Which is hoodwinking.
Yes, what happened today
simply
was...
a lie.
Chuck Schumer could have, instead of doing that scenario, that story I just told you, he brought to the floor a bill that stripped out the minimum wage. And then Bernie was like, I want to add it back in. Now, to be clear, when Bernie said, I want to add it back in, the chair could have said, when Lindsey Graham stood up and been like, that he can't even add it back in, the chair could have been like, no, Lindsey Graham, your point of order is not well heard. And then Graham still would have needed 60 votes to overturn that. And there would have at least been a 50 vote situation where you could vote just straight up. Do you want the minimum wage added to the bill or not? In a 50 vote scenario, that was not allowed to happen because they couldn't get 60 votes.
So ultimately, when Bernie proposes the amendment like this, we all know this is going to be symbolic action because it's already, the door has been closed in the process.
The door was closed. They took a 50 vote situation and they made it this is an absolutely true statement. The Democratic Party took a 50 vote situation for the minimum wage and turned it into a 60 vote situation. And there's an important detail here. The previous sort of good version of what could have happened, right? Schumer says, I don't care. I'm not listening to the parliamentarian. I'm putting it in the underlying bill. There still would have been a 50 vote on that. Okay. That's an important point. So follow me here. Schumer says, parliamentarian ruled, I don't care. I'm putting it in the bill. Lindsey Graham stands up, a point of order on this. Kamala Harris says, I don't hear your point of order. Graham says, I want to vote on Kamala Harris's ruling. I can't get 60 votes. Kamala Harris's ruling stands. Okay. Now the bill has the minimum wage in it. But now this is an important point. Lindsey Graham could have said, well, I'm offering an amendment to now strike out just this section of the bill, just the minimum wage. That would have been a 50 vote. So there was no way to avoid a 50 vote on the minimum wage. You could have had a 50 vote to either strike it out or a 50 vote to put it in. But none of that was allowed to happen.
And so in lieu, not having a 50 vote basically absolves the Biden administration for putting pressure on Manchin and Sinema to vote for a $15 minimum wage. We didn't even get to that stage.
And now, get to that stage.
And a lot of
the Democratic Party made sure that a House passed, and that's an important point, that a House passed bill with a minimum wage, and that the minimum wage was not allowed to be arbitrated in a 50 vote simple majority setting. They actually used their power to make sure it was a 60. So the party, many of the party members who claim that they don't, that they want to get rid of the filibuster, their party literally created a filibuster situation for a minimum wage when they could have used their power. They had the unilateral power to turn it into to not allow for a filibuster, because that's essentially what happened today. And by the way, there's a really important detail here, because ultimately part of the responsibility goes to Joe Biden, who didn't lift a finger to actually change any of this, actually played a very nefarious role, as did Kamala Harris. But Kamala Harris not using her power as presiding officer, Biden signaling that he wouldn't support this process. There's a good way to look at what happened, by the way. One good way to look at what happened, or sort of a positive way, is that even though the White House opposed essentially using these processes to add a minimum wage, there were still 42 Senate votes for that. I'm not trying to be like overly optimistic here, but like when your own party's president is opposing a process and you still get 42 votes in the Senate, that's like not 42 out of 50. That's like not so bad. But the smoking gun of Joe Biden not lifting a finger, right? If you want to he was trying, he said he's doing 5-15, like maybe he really does, here's the smoking gun. If you want to narrow it all the way down, here's like the proof that Joe Biden played a nefarious role here. 2 of those 8 votes against even allowing a debate on the minimum wage were senators from Delaware, not only a deep blue state, like Joe Biden's state. I'm sorry, it is not a credible argument to be like, listen, Joe Biden can't move Kamala, or Joe Manchin can't move Kristen Sinema. Like he what do you think he's going to be able to pick up the phone and call Joe? He could pick up the phone and talk to Chris Coons. He could pick up the phone and talk to Tom Carper from his own state. He didn't do that.
Yeah, and the conversation before this vote was that there were 2 opposed to the minimum wage hike, and this is just simply in the negotiations, and there was 1 maybe opposed, and so we ended up with 8 votes against, with this arcane, Byzantine process argument that that's what was
one way to look,
Sinema's statement about voting.
Yes, and one way to look at the process vote is to say those 8 members of those 8 senators face so little pressure.
Yeah, there was
so little that they cast a vote to not even allow a vote.
There was a pathway. I mean, that's what the takeaway of all of this is that there was a pathway, and the White House could have led the way, where this must-pass COVID bill contained the minimum wage hike, and then the arm twisting could have happened to Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema.
There's still a pathway. I mean, it's probably not going to happen, but there is still a pathway. Nobody wants to hear this, but there is still a pathway.
We want to hear it.
Okay, here's the pathway. Okay, and actually just now, literally in the last hour or so, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman tweeted out, and it's incredibly important. She was responding to what's going on in the negotiations on the Senate bill. She said, "This trend is outrageous, eliminating $15 an hour. What are we doing here? I'm frankly disgusted with some of my colleagues and question whether I can support this bill." Okay, that's Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, progressive member of the House. Okay, this is extremely important. Now, I'm not an optimist. I mean, I am an optimist sort of in my heart, but on this, I'm not going to pretend that this is good. But if you want to, this doesn't have to be over in this way. And nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to say this out loud. I worked in the House for 5 years. If you have 10 House Democrats who say right now, we cannot vote for this COVID relief bill unless there is some form of minimum wage increase in this bill, the entire dynamic changes. Now, I know there's a lot of dishonest commentary and people who don't want to hear, they'd be voting to kill the unemployment benefit. It would take down the whole. That is complete crap. It is total crap. If you had 10 House Democrats who said, I can't vote for a bill, I promised a minimum wage to my constituents, a minimum wage increase, I cannot vote for a final bill that does not have this in here. All of a sudden, now Joe Manchin's threat to take down the bill, if it includes $15, his sort of implicit threat, he hasn't actually said that, but the sort of implicit threat. Right now, he's the center of a solar system. Everyone revolves around him. But if you create another sun over here, to use the metaphor, and say, listen, 10 of us in a narrowly divided House can't vote for this, then all of a sudden there's 2 poles. Then all of a sudden it's wait a minute. If you're the White House with the entire executive branch behind you, the president of the United States, most powerful office in the world. All of a sudden, right now, you're like, I just got to deal with Joe Manchin. This is a must-pass bill. I've staked my presidency on it. I got to pass this bill. Whatever Joe Manchin wants, he gets because I got to pass this bill. Wait a minute. I got to deal with this other crew over here. Now you've created the situation in which the progressives are actually at the table. And so I would still complain about this because I believe in a $15 minimum wage. But hear me out here. Manchin, I can't support a bill. In the implicit threat, I may not be able to support a bill with a final bill with $15. Progressives over here, we're going to take down the bill unless it includes some sort of minimum wage hike. Well, $7, $15. There's something in the middle here.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's not 15, maybe then Joe Biden gets it. What you've now done, if the House Democrats actually did that, Joe Biden would have to get off his ass and actually start calling senators, like, for instance, let's start with senators in his own damn state, right? He'd actually have to use the power of the presidency to try to forge a compromise. And the thing is that I would still be like, hey, if you only get 13, 12, people like me would still complain. But like for Joe Biden, it's like a win-win situation, right? It's a total win-win. Like
But
you got
David, 15 was already a compromise position.
Let me be clear. I just said I would complain about it. It's not acceptable. But like, it is ridiculous that there's nothing in there.
Right
nothing.
now, yes. Right now, we're on track to get nothing.
Nothing.
The minimum wage will in 2021.
I'm not saying I would be being like $12 is unacceptable, whatever. But the point is, nothing is beyond an insult. Nothing is like dystopian. It's like
it's surfing.
Isn't there an argument if we're talking about negotiation strategy? And I'm interested to know what Kshama thinks about this as well, given her role in the whole Fight for 15 movement. Isn't there an argument that the part of the problem is that we started with 15, and those same 10 Congress people could say, oh, screw it, I'm not voting for this thing now unless it's 24 where it should be.
For sure.
Hold the line and say, no, we're going to hold the line until it's 15. We're not budging on this. It's going to be 15. Because at the same time, isn't it true that, and I wanted to ask you about this, there's the 2,000 to 1,400. There's the $400 unemployment benefit down to 300. There's been all of this. There's the new cutoffs for how much salary you can make in order to get the benefit. There's been all of this negotiating that seems to be Democrats negotiating against themselves for what upside. So when a world where all of that is happening, it does feel really frustrating to think that we have to cut ourselves off at the knees again, instead of just holding the line because 15 is popular.
I mean, if you're asking me, I completely agree that anything less than 15 is outrageous. But it sort of separating out my own personal opinion on this. My point is nothing, literally not anything in this bill is both completely outrageous, but also a reflection, and this is the key point, a reflection on the fact that Joe Manchin is willing to wield power and the progressives in Congress who have power are not willing to wield power. In other words, Biden's sitting on the sidelines, no minimum wage, nothing. He doesn't even feel like he has to give them like anything, like nothing, like they don't have to give him anything. And the point is they have power to demand something. Like they literally do. The smaller the margin in the House, the more power
that was a 7-vote margin
have. Like they're not willing to use that power when and the larger 50,000 foot viewpoint here is, if they're never willing to use that power ever, then this is a presidency of Joe Manchin. And I want to underscore this point because it's really important. The power must be wielded on bills in which there are no Republican votes. Must pass bill and no Republican votes to get. Because you've heard this before. Oh, Biden's going to add, go through this scenario. Biden's going to add the minimum wage to the National Defense Authorization. Oh, well, what's wrong with that? That's a good idea. I'm not opposed to that idea. Add a $15 minimum wage to the National Defense Authorization Act. Here's what likely happens. Republicans move to strike it from the National Defense Authorization Act. They maybe they can get Hickenlooper, maybe they can get Manchin, maybe they can get, one of those, I mean, Hickenlooper actually voted the right way, but maybe they can get one of those 8 Democrats to vote to strip it. Then once they strip it, they have all 50 Republican votes for it, right? And it's a 90-0 vote, right? You have to be willing to withhold votes on bills in which Biden cannot make the bill worse in order to attract some Republicans. It has to be, you have to take a stand specifically on must-pass legislation where there are no Republican votes available if you water down the bill. That is the way to leverage power. That's not even rocket science. It's game theory. It's just like 101, like negotiation. Like here's the thing. He doesn't need, the Progressive Caucus's votes on the NDAA that doesn't have a minimum wage. He needs their votes now on this. He needs their vote.
So how do we make that happen, David? Because you were with us on this force the vote train. And at that moment, the $15 minimum wage was raised as an issue that it would be better to fight for, to withhold one's vote over. There has been some inclination in the form of some tweets that certain members of the House may be open to such a thing. But of course, we saw that around force the vote as well. And Ilhan Omar did some tweets that made us hopeful for a second. I think Cori Bush had some tweets that made us hopeful for a second. But obviously nothing materialized. And from the vantage point of 2 months, it's very difficult to perceive what was gained by voting for Pelosi without seemingly any condition. And so, we were talking before you came on with Kshama about what pressures are available to us to encourage these House members to withhold their vote.
Well, look, the problem is it's really a deep sort of psychological issue. And we wrote about this at the Daily Poster, which is basically that, like, look, Joe Manchin is willing to take down an otherwise good, decent bill. And he's willing to hack away at it for weeks, to try to use his power to make the good parts worse, because he doesn't care. I mean, he fundamentally just doesn't care, right? The progressive members of Congress who could be this kind of anti-Manchin, sort of antithesis of Manchin, and I want to be clear, they're good people who are thinking morally in a sense of harm reduction. If I take down this bill, there won't be unemployment benefits. If I take down this bill, it will kill all the other good things in this bill, which are indeed desperately needed. And I understand that fear. That is a legitimate moral fear. It is a harm reduction fear. And it is the fear that the proponents of getting rid of the minimum wage, like, frankly, or the people who don't care about including the minimum wage, like the Biden administration, that they prey on. If you take a stand, you'll take down the whole bill. If you take that stand, you would. Meanwhile, I mean, what's ridiculous about it is, we're up against the unemployment deadline, which is a real deadline, super real. The people who are citing that deadline are the people who wasted 2 months sitting around doing nothing on this. Like, I sat around doing, like, hacking away at this bill, taking the 2,000 to 1,400. I've been sitting around, like, all of a sudden it's like, we can't even delay this bill 6 hours to add the minimum wage. It's like, it's such a bunch of crap, right? And my point, and the deeper point is that those House members, if they actually did this, have to understand that if Biden is staking his presidency on this bill, if this truly is a must-pass bill, which I totally believe it is, there's no killing this bill. There's like, right. You vote it down, they have to come back and revise it. And I want to give you an example from history where that happened. An even more acute emergency situation. No one remembers this. This is how old I am. This is why I have white, gray going on white hair, right?
It looks good.
Thank you. 2008, George Bush comes to the Congress with the Federal Reserve Chairman and the Treasury Secretary. The entire global economy is going to melt down right now unless we pass this literally a 3-page bill that says the Treasury Secretary can literally do whatever he wants forever. Like, he can spend his. This is like, and the Congress actually was like, okay, we're really scared. This is like really seems real bad, but like we're voting that down. Like, no, I can't pass literally a 3-page bill saying that you're now the king of the world. Like, it's not possible. And they had to immediately, and then, the Dow lost 3,000 points, and, everyone freaked out for like 24, 48 hours, and they had to come back with a new bill that was a 65-page. Frankly, it wasn't very much better. I'm be clear about that. Like, it was still a bank bailout. It wasn't very much better. But the point is, the idea that, like, you cast the vote, the bill's gone, it's dead, everything. No, like, you vote down a must-pass bill, they're going to come back right away. They just have to deal with you. You get to be at the negotiating table and not just on the menu.
And this is in the middle of a week-long stock market crash as Wall Street Bank after Wall Street Bank was faltering.
Yes.
And it seemed like, global capitalism was, potentially done, and they still played hardball.
The idea that if, like, a core of Democrats vote down the COVID bill tomorrow or Monday, saying it must include a minimum wage, that means the entire COVID relief bill is dead forever, is ridiculous. And everybody, if there are people in Washington who are watching this, everybody in Washington knows exactly that what I'm saying is 100% true. It's just the truth. It's just true.
So Kshama, why is that reality not known more broadly? How are they getting away with, Sirota just outlined a number of things that have happened here. The Biden administration has purposefully rigged this, basically, so that you go from a 50-vote situation to a 60-vote situation. We've been told repeatedly that there are all these hurdles in their way, from a parliamentarian nobody heard of a week ago to, some real obstacles like, these two senators. But also we have equal amount of power on the side of progressives to hold the bill up for the same thing. We're told again and again that if this thing doesn't go through, somehow it's going to negatively impact progressives, but it doesn't negatively impact Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, even though all of these progressives are safe and they're all blue, 2-to-1 blue districts. So what are we supposed to do in this situation?
I think what we are supposed to do as ordinary people is a somewhat separate question than what we think the squad should be doing right now. And I definitely agree with David that the squad could and should be withholding, and squad and other progressives should be withholding their vote on this must-pass bill. Absolutely. In fact, this is the best time for the squad to leverage their votes because it is a must-pass bill, because Biden absolutely needs to get this done. And I think, but that's only going to work if the squad and the progressive Congress members understand some really basic questions which are really important. One is that David was, obviously talking about the understandable sort of psychology that people are going to blame you for holding up the unemployment benefits, all of that. I think this is where political strategy comes into play. If I were in the squad, if we were there, what we would do is completely and boldly and sharply reject this as political gaslighting. The only people holding anything up are the corporate politicians who are refusing to pass something as basic as $15 an hour, which is the bare minimum necessary to lift the people mired in poverty for generations in Joe Manchin's district. Yeah. The squad needs to speak this way, not sort of cower behind. It's understandable that they're feeling the pressure, but that's not going to get them out of it. We have to, the best defense, in other words, is a good offense. You have to go on the offensive. When Joe Manchin and the corporate Democrats go on the offensive against you, it's your moral and political obligation to go on the offensive against them and say, this is gaslighting. We don't accept this this argument. The only people who are holding up 15 are you. And I think we have to also be clear that kind of, it's not, as I said, it's not some sort of political theater for its own sake. I really agree with all of you that this is serious business. We want to pass 15. But that's exactly why they have to back this tactic up by mobilizing ordinary people. I don't think it would be useful for us to sort of focus on very wonky and parliamentary tactics. Obviously they need to know what tactics are available to them, but that's not the end of the road. They need to employ those tactics with the idea that they're going to mobilize ordinary people. Like if tomorrow morning the squad woke up and held a press conference, which millions of people would watch, where they would say that we are going to do this. We are not going to vote for a stimulus bill that does not include $15 an hour. And Joe Biden needs to deliver. The Democrats need to deliver. And we urge millions of people to come out. We are urging the labor leaders to mobilize their members. Let's do rallies and actions on Saturday night, on here, there, and decide where we want to do it. Strategic locations. Do that. and, go all out in the way. I mean, as David and others were saying, Joe Manchin is fighting like hell for the class he represents. We should be fighting, and the representatives of working people like the Squad and Bernie Sanders, they should be fighting unabashedly and unapologetically for their side. I mean, everybody saw the disgusting that video of Kristen Sinema jubilantly casting her vote against the interest of working people. I mean, that is just awful. So we need, the flip side of that for working people is the Squad going all out. And I think it's really important to understand that the cards that they hold, if they're willing to mobilize ordinary people to have their back. And on that note, I think it's important to also say that they should not be compromising on 15, because they don't need to at this moment. The pressure should be on Biden and the corporate Democrats. They should not compromise on the Defense Authorization Act. I mean, we don't think that it helps to set a precedent for working people's representatives to sort of make those kinds of compromises where you do some good things or some bad things, rob Peter to pay Paul, fight to pass 15, but then compromise on an attack on civil rights and maybe a Patriot Act Part 2, whatever. My point is that they should be holding strong on all those fronts, but they should be finding a way to build up their power. And so their power is not in the Capitol building. Their power is outside the Capitol building, where they can actually bring the people who agree with them. And, David mentioned the people in Delaware. I mean, aren't there working people in Delaware who need $15 an hour? Why aren't we mobilizing working people in Delaware to rallies and actions this weekend to put the real fear in those politicians?
Joe Manchin representing.
I mean, the thing is, sorry to interrupt, but the question is not about doing the principle thing only and taking the correct position, morally correct. It is a strategic question. Are you going to use the tactics that will put a real political price tag on Biden and the Democrats not delivering? Right now, that political price tag to them is not from the left, it's from Joe Manchin. So who's going to put that price tag?
100%. I just wanted to point out that 49 out of 50 states, not just a majority, but a super majority of voters support hiking the minimum wage. We're talking 60% at minimum. And that includes places like Joe Manchin's West Virginia, one of the poorest states in the nation.
Absolutely. And look at the potential for building multiracial working class solidarity. I mean, Black workers in Georgia, immigrant workers in Arizona, West Virginia, white workers. I mean, I'm obviously simplifying because there are obviously different ethnic groups represented in every state. But my point is that this is actually a huge opportunity, not only to win $15 an hour, but also to build for something much bigger going forward. And this is a crucial question for the left, because we are facing the threat of right populism still, and we need a real strategy to pull people away from being attracted to right populist ideas. But unless there is something really on offer, I mean, if the only alternative to right populism is Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer, that doesn't work. We need a real left strategy that is presented as an alternative, and this is an important opportunity. And just on another point you made, Brianna, about it seems like the Democrats are negotiating against themselves. I think that's where I think we have to recognize that there's a divide. I don't think Chuck Schumer believes that he's negotiating against himself, because he's not representing working people. So he's doing what he can, and that's why they're using all these tactics. And I appreciated David describing, what exactly happened there and how they maneuvered that. But they're doing all that maneuvering not because they're lost or because they don't know how to fight for 15. That is what they want to do, and it was nefarious.
It would be nice if the Squad would say that. I mean, I feel, they say a lot, and they're saying a lot in this moment, but the key things that I think are missing from their rhetoric are, the connection to kind of the corporate influence point, right? So we're never having a conversation about why it is that Joe Manchin in the poorest state, one of the poorest states in the union at least, would be coming out this way on $15 minimum wage. We're not having a conversation about what it means to be a congressperson from Delaware, the incorporation big bank state, and my experience is that those kind of corruption narratives resonate enormously well in a bipartisan way. And I know, Sirota, this was a conversation that you and I had often on the campaign, whether or not that particular note about corruption, which was a bell that was rung pretty strong in 2016, should have been banged a little harder in 2020. And then the other piece of it is talking about all the perverse incentives that exist within the party. Because unless you understand that you don't get what you want by simply being nice to people, like I think there's this notion, and I'm guilty of this as well. When we say, okay, Biden's gonna lobby Joe Manchin to change his mind on $15 minimum wage, like what does that look like?
Okay,
what does that mean?
And
I think
that's a
people
great
think it's
question.
just like, people think it's just like if I'm nice to him and call him and say happy birthday, then that's what we just don't upset them enough. So what is it?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because we wrote a piece about this at the Daily Poster this week, and it wasn't a theoretical piece. It was a piece about Lyndon Johnson. Joe Biden is now there's a narrative among the liberal political elite, liberal political class. Donald Trump was an all-powerful dictator in the presidency. Joe Biden somehow has no power at all in the same office of the presidency. It's obviously absurd. But how do you actually prove that it's absurd? How do you, because you hear, you think that Joe Biden pick up the phone and call Joe Manchin, what do you think? You think he's how does he have superpowers? And this is ridiculous. Or we really, the absurdity of the arguments are that now the presidency doesn't have the power to even move or pressure or influence members even of his own party. And so we looked back at history, and this is one of zillions of similar anecdotes throughout history, but it's a perfect one for now, which is that in 1964, Lyndon Johnson faced the prospect, even in a much larger Democratic majorities, of Medicare being killed, his Medicare proposal being killed. And there was a major committee hearing where sort of a decisive step of the process, and two senators who were adamantly opposed to Medicare surprisingly cast a vote to allow Medicare to move forward. And they were asked, why did you vote for Medicare? You've said you don't like it, you hate it. And one of the senators, a conservative Democrat from Florida, said, because Lyndon asked me to. Now, that wasn't presumably Lyndon Johnson calling up and being nice to that senator, right? That wasn't like they had drinks or they hung out. What came out a little bit later was that that senator wanted something in their state. That senator wanted a special project here. The executive branch is not just Joe Biden having drinks with a couple of senators. The entire executive branch provides things to states and to senators and their project. There's so I can't overstate how much power a president has to influence individual members of Congress. It's ridiculous that the discussion has now sort of revolved around this idea that a president can't influence individual senators yes, it's true. In certain cases they can't, because there's just an ideological fine. And I'm not saying that if Joe Biden pushed Joe Manchin as hard as he could, that Joe Manchin still wouldn't be being an asshole, right? I can't promise you that. But I can tell you that Joe Biden has an enormous amount of power over Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, arguably more over Kyrsten Sinema, because he won Arizona. And he certainly has a huge amount of influence with his own Delaware senators. So the point is, if the White House wants to use its power, it has a lot of power. If it doesn't want to use its power to influence those members of the president's own party, then a lot of those senators, a lot of those Congress people are not going to kind of go along. And so, again, I go back to that, I'm not being overly optimistic here, but the fact that the minimum wage got 42 Senate Democratic votes when Joe Biden had made very clear that he didn't want it to go forward, at least in this way, if not totally, right? You can debate, did he not want it to go forward in this way, or did he not want it to go forward at all? We can have that discussion. But the point is that you still got 42 Senate votes for something that the White House made clear it didn't want to happen. And so imagine if you had a president who was, and this is the key point about the strategy I've laid out, which is to say, the point is to motivate Joe Biden, right? If he suddenly has to deal with 10 House members who can take down the bill that he's saying is his must-pass bill, it motivates him to use his power to pressure those senators to get on board. Like, it's not about it is about, but it's not really sort of effectively about 10 House members versus Joe Manchin. It's about 10 House members saying to this enormously powerful White House, the most powerful office in the world, you must actually engage here and find a way to make this happen, or you cannot count on it. It's to mobilize that enormous force for what you want.
So to that point, I know that some people might think we're being cynical when we say things like Joe Biden didn't really want it, but I really want people to use their imagination and contemplate what a world where Joe Biden was invested in this would look like. Here's Kristen Sinema in 2014 coming out full-throatedly for raising the minimum wage to $16. Oh, sorry, no, $15 an hour.
Right, they didn't specify how much. Could be 1 penny.
Yeah. Well, pointing out how little a minimum wage salary actually gets you, right? You know, there's a world where if the Democratic Party really wanted to put pressure on these people, you would be seeing ads, press conferences, talking heads on the news, highlighting the hypocrisy of these people, highlighting the number of West Virginians who support a minimum wage raise, which is 63% of West Virginians, embarrassing Joe Manchin by going around his state and doing town halls with people who are really struggling there. Right? I think we can all imagine what it would look like if the Biden administration were genuinely
actually can I just make a point here?
Yeah.
Like real quick. Sure. There's a visual way to make the point that you're making. There's a visual way, and I'm going to put it in the chat, and maybe you can put it on screen. It's just that picture of Lyndon Johnson. That's what it looks like. Right? Like the famous picture. I don't know if you can put it on screen. That's what an engaged White House looks like. It's that very, very classic. It's a famous photo. Okay. And if you can't put it on screen, it's the very, very famous photo of LBJ. Exactly. It's that photo. Okay. That's what an engaged White House looks like. Right? That's a very famous photo of LBJ. You know, it was actually, frankly, he was sort of pantomiming. He was sort of mugging for the camera. How they asked him, like, how do you get your way? And he sort of was like, this is how I get in the face of people who I want to act. That is what an engaged White House does. An engaged White House doesn't say, oh, we have the power to, with the parliament, our vice president could actually make this go forward. The first thing we're going to say is like, that's not going to happen. Like, that's the opposite way of actually trying to make something happen.
I agree with you that Joe Biden should be using his size to dominate smaller senators. It's something that we voted for and that we wanted for a long time. But yeah,
he's short.
Tiny little fella. I just, just the fact of Kristen Sinema, in fact, he ran on raising the minimum wage like Joe Biden ran on the minimum wage. It's shameless.
It's ridiculous.
It? And this is not an intractable political problem. Because even Joe Manchin was saying before, look, I don't like 15, but I could probably negotiate for 12.
Here's the thing.
Maybe you could buy my vote for 14.
If I'm cynical, if I'm like Joe Biden, right? Cynical me, right? Or I'm not cynical, but if I was like cynical Joe Biden, I'd be like, here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I got the House guys saying they can't vote for it. They're going to take down my bill. I got Joe Manchin saying he's going to take it down. If it like has it in there, like, what am I going to do? Here's what I'm going to do. Like, again, like me, David Sirota, I'd still be annoyed and upset that it wasn't $15. Yeah. I'd be like, what's the minimum wage in Arizona? Oh, it's $12.15. Oh, okay. President Joe Biden, cynical. I'd be like, Kristen Sinema, you can't be against the national minimum wage. That your state. Not only is it your state's minimum wage, your state voters passed it. Like, so you can't oppose that. And like Manchin, you've said you're for 11. I'm just trying to get you to like 12, 15. And like progressives, I'm not going to give you 15. So I can't give you all that you want, but like you can't vote against it if I'm giving you something, right? Like that's the cynical LBJ way to get to something.
I have a very small question for David. Earlier today, there was some drama on the floor of the Senate when they realized they did not have Joe Manchin's vote for the final package, and tried to put together something that stripped out
Yep.
the top up of unemployment benefits. Could you explain what happened and what the resolution was?
So basically, as far as I honestly, I didn't follow all the details of that, but basically the implicit threat that Manchin would take down the final package meant that they had to try to come up with some sort of compromise on reducing or potentially reducing the length or the size of unemployment benefits and again, it just underscores that the implicit threat that Manchin will vote with Republicans, he has created a solar system that everything revolves around him. And nobody has to think about the progressives because there is not a progressive bloc in the Senate and there is not a progressive bloc in the House willing to say, if you cross this, we have a line, and if you cross our line, you don't have our votes. Like,
but you don't need a block in the Senate, right?
You need one person.
Dude. Yes, exactly. And look, I want to be clear. Like, it's easy. I'm not a member of Congress, I'm not a senator. Like, it would be hard if you're like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or you're AOC and you're, to vote with the Republicans, right? Like but this is actually sort of the point, which is like, it's easier if they all do it together, right? Like Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, the squad, the 10 or 15 other, the Progressive Caucus, right? It's so much easier and more powerful. There's safety in numbers, right? And then it's, but they're too afraid. And I want to be not it's not just fear, because it's easy to just say it's fear, because it's not just fear. There's also a legit harm reduction psychology, which I can't berate.
But it doesn't need to be. That presumes that they're gonna lose. Shama, you get on
I
this.
agree with you. I totally agree.
It presumes that the
Correct.
harm the quote unquote harm that you're talking about, David,
Correct.
that they need to prevent is discord with the corporate politicians. But that
Correct.
is exactly what working people want them to do. They don't want them to go along with the corporate politicians. That's what's missing. And so the fear that what they should be fearing right now is that they're not going all out. They're not going to the mat to fight for ordinary people.
Yes.
And I think I totally agree that that if Biden wanted to exercise his power, he has all kinds of power to keep all of the Democrats in discipline. The reason he's not doing them, it's not a politically neutral thing. I mean, far from it. The reason he's not doing it is not because he's some sort of shrinking violet compared to LBJ. It's because he doesn't want to fight for 15. So why will he do that?
No, look, that I
totally,
totally
I mean,
agree.
what he's really doing is that he's defending big business. All of those who voted against it are defending big business. And at the end of the day, we have to also recognize that LBJ, whatever LBJ did, he did under the pressure of the civil rights movement and the movements at that time. And I think it's important to recognize also, if you look at the Nixon era on paper, I mean, forget Nixon himself, but on paper, it is one of the most progressive eras in American history. The Vietnam War ending, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Roe v. Wade, and the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency. It was an era. It was two things. One, it was an era of fighting movements, and the other thing was that those fighting movements on separate issues were sort of there was a moment where those movements were starting to coalesce, and together that heightened moment really put the scare in the ruling class, in the capitalist class. And it was that combined pressure of mass movements rocking the streets of the United States that put so much pressure on one of the vilest Republicans to ever go into the White House. So I think that's what we need to remember right now. The reason Biden is not doing it is because he does not represent the interests of ordinary people. But at the same time, the fact that this debate is unfolding in such an explosive way, it shows the pressure that is on the Democratic Party. And I think that is where I think we also have to frame things correctly. It's not about lobbying Joe Manchin for $15 minimum wage. It's about fighting to make it completely untenable for him to not vote yes on minimum wage. You vote the right way or you're out. There is a political price for you to pay if you don't do what ordinary people need. And the whole question of whether or not Biden should be lobbying Joe Manchin, I think that sort of misses the point. It presupposes that somehow Biden and Harris and Joe Manchin are on opposite sides. No, I mean, there are differences between them. But at the end of the day, they represent both sides, though both of them represent Wall Street interests. So it's not so much about Joe Biden lobbying Joe Manchin. It's about ordinary people and our representatives fighting against both of them, against all corporate politicians to win what we need.
So I got to run here in a second, but I just want to say a couple things. One, I completely agree. The idea that we're like waiting for Joe Biden to be nice and lobby Joe Manchin. No, like Joe Biden is like a vessel. Like the incentives must be aligned. The pressure must be aligned to force him to do things. I don't believe, I've worked in politics and media for a long time. Like most politicians don't, operate out of like, oh, I'm the goodness of my own heart, right? They like the point of like, if the progressives in the House withheld their vote, it would force Joe Biden, whether he liked it or not, to have to actually use power for the things that those progressives actually want. It would force him, whether, whatever is in his heart. I totally agree. So that's a key point. It's not about like my senator's a good person or my congressperson is a good person. It's like, what do they feel that they have to actually do and have to actually deliver? And so you have to have a dispassionate analysis of how power actually works. Joe Manchin is willing to wield power for all sorts of reasons. He is willing to wield power. The progressives are not willing to wield power. And the final thing I'll say is I agree with you. The harm reduction idea is a powerful form of propaganda. It is absolutely a powerful form of propaganda. And this is why I think when we think strategically about this is why I have to underscore again, it's kind of an esoteric or sort of like in the weeds point, but that these fights must be waged in this way, specifically on bills and on initiatives where there are not Republican votes available. I'm going to give you an example of where you can run into problems if you don't focus it that way. That basically, I'm going to miss the finer points here, but basically, Russ Feingold, good guy, at least for the senator, tried to do the right thing on the Dodd-Frank bill, held out on some provisions. Really did hold. Basically was one of the only Democrats to be like, I'm not going to vote for this bill because basically the it's not strong enough. I'm not, right, and all the Republicans were against it because they didn't want to do anything on Wall Street. So he didn't side with the Republicans, but he was like, I'm willing to actually try to wield power. And the problem is that what ended up happening was that the Obama administration then peeled off Republican votes by making the bill worse to get some votes from people like Susan Collins. So my point is that the COVID relief bill is such an important opportunity because, as far as I can tell, there are no Republican votes available for the COVID relief bill, especially in the House. There just aren't votes available for the package at all. Like you can't tweak it a little bit and you might get a bunch of, like, as far as I can tell, like somebody can try to prove me wrong, but I've like followed this pretty closely. There are just no Republican votes available for that, which means that the progressives actually have a momentary, fleeting, but huge amount of power right now because Biden cannot basically say, all right, I'm going to tweak the bill over here a little. I'm going to give Wall Street a regulation here and get 20 House Republicans with me. Like he has to deal with them if they force him to deal with them. And so the question is, why won't they force him to deal with him? Yeah. And that's where your point about harm reduction comes in, which is like, I think they're still in that, like, look, I don't want to take that. It's a false premise. It's false. They will pass that bill.
Well, I want to bring in, I know, Sirota, you have to go.
I got to go.
Tell people, if you want to tell people where they can find you and subscribe to the Daily Poster and all of those things.
Yes, dailyposter.com. Subscribe, go on Twitter, yell at me, send me nasty emails. That's all fine. I'm used to it. I mean, it bothers me a little bit, but
You heard it here first, folks. It's okay to abuse David Sirota on Twitter. Go at it.
But I do have to go, and I really appreciate you having me here.
We appreciate you coming. We appreciate you coming on and explaining the things to us. I mean, I could have done that explanation, but I like hearing it from you. Thanks.
Take care.
David.
Thanks again. Have a good weekend.
David, stay
Take
safe.
care.
And I'm so glad to welcome Shahid Buttar. If there were like a melange of Kshama's kind of revolutionary strategic approach and David's kind of wonkishness, it might be you, Shahid. So thank you for coming. I'm not sure how much of the conversation leading up to this you listened to, but why don't you start by just giving us your quick take on what went down today?
Sure. And thank you for the invitation. And I just want to say how honored I am to share a platform with Kshama. I've admired your work so much. I saw today the corporate Democratic Party reveal itself yet again as serving Wall Street and capital and not constituents or we the people of the United States. I find it particularly revealing that the 8 Democratic senators who voted against the federal minimum wage increase, every single one of them is a millionaire. And I don't particularly think of that as coincidental. Policymakers promote their class interests, it seems, and that is certainly true of the Democratic centrist corporate leadership. The very same people that Kshama was talking about would, rather burn the party to the ground than allow it to be pivoted away from serving Wall Street. Those figures not only run the party as David was describing, but ultimately, and this is, I think, the really key in Kshama's perspective, they are still beholden to their constituents and their supporters. And while we, I think, appropriately bemoan the way Wall Street is off the rails, we don't have to settle for that. There's no reason, especially the base that put those people in office and the progressive grassroots showed up over the last several months to force a transition in Washington. And we are witnessing in real time the declaration that Washington doesn't particularly care.
So this is the central question, and I really don't mean to belabor this point. Everyone tell me if they're tired of me saying this, but to me, this seems to be the fundamental issue. Historically, and I'm trying to get to the root of why I think people's cognition is messed up in this way. Historically, so much of what the left has fought for has been genuinely not popular, at least with respect to polls. Right? It took some work for us to get to a place where we got Americans to understand that socialized health, like Medicare for all, is a thing that everyone else is doing and it's good and we can do it here. And I promise you it's going to work and be good. We're kind of there now, in large part because of the Bernie 2016-2020 campaign. We are, $15 minimum wage, won in Florida when Biden lost, right? All of these policies are much more popular than all of these politicians. And yet, when we're in a moment like this, the argument is it's the Democrats who have to capitulate from supporting or pushing for those policies because they will suffer rebuke from the public. And the candidates, the politicians who are aggressively undermining the will of the people seem to never have that concern. And to David's point, there does seem to be this sense, and this came out with our conversation with Rokana earlier this week, Virgil, that Democrats, they frame it as, but we just aren't willing to do the harm. We have to do harm reduction. We aren't willing to do anything that will get even marginal benefit from our people. We're nice people, and of course, we'll do whatever it takes. We'll suffer any blow. We'll caveat any policy down to a little nub of itself if it means our people can get something, because something's better than nothing.
Yeah, and that's one of the distinctions between, we talk a bit about what the Freedom Caucus did during the Obama administration, where they held the balance of power. Republicans held the Congress, but there was a small caucus, about 30 people, that was willing to sink must-pass bills in order to get what they wanted. And that's instructive. We should remember that. But we should remember that, one, Freedom Caucus did not end up getting a lot of what they wanted, or pretty much anything, but they did cause a lot of problems for Republican leadership and for the Democratic president. But two,
they knocked out the centrist Republican Speaker of the House in that era.
Yes, they did, and as well, they managed to knock out the House Majority Leader as well in a primary. But I think the real distinction is they were willing to do that because they're okay with shutting down the government and furloughing hundreds of thousands of federal workers because they would rather fire all those workers. And the squad, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, I think they're just not willing to play that kind of hardball because they don't want to blink. Because they still, at the end of the day, want people to get $1,400 checks. They want some version of an unemployment top-up, and there's never been articulated a limit to what they're willing to accept.
One thought here, just to throw this out there, I agree with the analysis, and we would want, frankly, the squad to be more bold, but I feel like we're ignoring an elephant in the room, which is an apt metaphor here, and that's the Democratic Speaker of the House, who frankly controls Congress and the members in it through a mix of carrots and sticks. And I particularly think back to the force the vote era, when members of the squad chose to conciliate, and Pelosi still denied committee assignments to the squad, as if just to rub in who wields power in the House. And this willingness or not to confront the centrist leadership, I think it really turns on, there's two dimensions here. One is a policymaker beholden to their constituents or instead their career? And in the case of the squad, I think they're beholden to their constituents. Then the question becomes, are you willing to, as Kshama said, go to the mat, to have the fight in public? We've already won the public debate on issues like Medicare for all, on the fight to 15. And frankly, the fight for 15 is itself inadequate, but as long as that's where we're at, it's worth noting that 61% of the American public supports it. And there's no reason to shy away from that debate. And, Bree makes the point that in the past, Republicans, even on much thinner ice, have been willing to force questions and to aggressively champion their perspectives in the public. And that's exactly what the American people respond to. Frankly, in this case, it's obvious why. It's just simply because so many people are in economic crisis that is mounting every day. These are existential needs. Facing 32 million Americans would get a raise if Congress simply showed up for work here. And the other thing that I think we're sort of overlooking is it's not just the case that the federal minimum wage hasn't changed since 2009. There have been multiple rounds of massive tax giveaways to the 1%. It hasn't been static. There's been an incredibly momentous, historically unprecedented transfer of wealth from working people to plutocrats. And we can't ignore that context when we're questioning whether or not 30 million people should have a right to survive with dignity while working full-time employment.
Yeah, and think of the bailouts that the big banks and the big corporations got when the majority of working people in America were reeling from the effects of the Great Recession. And I think, Shahid, I totally agree with you that it is not coincidental that the Democrats who took a shameless position against working people are all millionaires. That's not a coincidence. In fact, the overall wealth in Congress is staggering. If you look at how much wealth they own, and so it's definitely a huge factor in how they see themselves as allied with Wall Street interests. But I wanted to clarify, though, that as consciousness rises, we're not in the same era as in 2009. It's a different period, and millions of young people are radicalizing. You wouldn't have had the largest street movement ever in U.S. history had a decisive shift not being taken place in consciousness, especially among young people. So it is forcing the institutions and organizations of capitalism to also sort of superficially transform themselves to be able to co-opt energies of movements. And so what you see in many different cities, including in Seattle, for example, just to take Seattle as an example, there aren't millionaire, and some of them are well off, but it's not the same as Congress. We have 9 council members and a mayor. There, many of them are well off. But that's not the defining factor. It's also not a defining factor that they're all white male. In fact, we have not only a super majority people of color council, we have a super majority of women. So it's a majority of women council and a super majority of women and majority women of color. Sorry, it's both are true, and I keep confusing both things. But the point is that when we first came to City Hall in 2014. It was a much more openly, overtly pro-corporate Democrat. They're all Democrats. I'm the only socialist. There are no Republicans. But they were much more overtly and boldly pro-corporate. But we completely transformed the political landscape. And at the same time, larger shifts are happening in U.S. society, not because of us, but at the same time. And so what we've seen is there's been a slow but sure exodus of all those more overtly pro-corporate council members. And now we have what looks like a progressive Democratic majority on the city council. And they're not your typical white male millionaires, or multimillionaires. It's not like that. Some of them are actually renters and all of that. And yet, despite all of that, we still have the situation in Seattle where at the end of the day, it is, we overwhelmingly start on progressive issues with one reliable vote on the council, which is mine as the socialist. And then my office, Socialist Alternative, Progressive Labor Unions, organizations that we're working with, ordinary people, we build movements. We push that so-called progressive Democratic City Council into then conceding on our victories. I mean, the Amazon tax victory that we won last year is a very crucial example of this, because it is not a small thing, because we went up against a $1 trillion corporation and the richest man in the world to win this victory. It was 3 years in the making. We had a setback in 2018. Then we had a sort of a fight to the death kind of re-election fight in 2019. And then in 2020, we won it in the thick of the Black Lives Matter movement. But when we were doing it, the reason we won is exactly what the squad needs to do now, which is turn outward and use your elected position to mobilize hundreds, thousands of people. And the way we did it was actually organize what we call Tax Amazon action conferences. Hundreds of people attended these action conferences, and together thousands of people have attended all these action conferences. And they were not just rah-rah rallies where a few leaders made speeches. No, they were actually serious organizing meetings where we discussed the most crucial elements of what should go into the Amazon tax, what should be funded. And we had discussion, debate, and an actual vote where hundreds of people had a chance to weigh in. And it was through that energy of sort of ownership of the movement, having a say in the movement, that really brought them out to rallies and marches. And we ended up having to really rethink what we were doing, because it went halfway through our fight, we went into COVID lockdown. So we did online Tax Amazon action conferences. Then we did a socially distanced car caravan. All of this and a ballot initiative threat, a credible ballot initiative threat, put pressure on those progressive Democrats. They couldn't stop us from winning it. They had to concede. And this is one of the things I wanted to add to the discussion, is that after they were forced to concede on the Amazon tax, now they have given it a new name called Jumpstart. I mean, Jumpstart is nothing. You didn't see Jumpstart action conferences. You didn't see Jumpstart rallies. You didn't see Jumpstart tables and Jumpstart car caravan. You saw Tax Amazon action conferences, car caravans, and rallies and marches. And why? Because that was the Tax Amazon movement. But it is important to understand that the capitalist class and its institutions have an incredible ability to sort of metamorphose themselves into superficially as if they are representing the movements. And we have to see through that, read between the lines, and understand that they don't actually represent us. And they're trying to co-opt the energies of the movement. And when they can't prevent us from winning victories, then they will say, oh, we won it. So even if we had success on $15 an hour now, expect to see all kinds of missives from the Biden administration about how Biden was the great messiah who won 15 for you.
I mean, we kind of see that in the way his election victory is described, and winning the Senate at all. It's like everyone had seemingly kind of given up on it. A bunch of activists put their shoulder to the grindstone and pulled Georgia out of nowhere. And suddenly it's, oh, yes, Joe Biden has this enormous mandate, yada, yada. But now, of course, the mandate doesn't mean he can actually effectuate anything. And
now it's the parliamentarian. I'm so sorry. And, Biden doesn't have the power. It's the parliamentarian who has all the power.
Well, and I think the illusion that the parliamentarian has any influence can only persist because of the absence of pressure from the outside forcing the hand of the politicians, right? And and I see this across context. It's one reason, Kshama, I really appreciate not just your voice and the substance of your policy positions, but also almost like the theory of democracy you construct here, because it's not about people who win elections and swear oaths of office and then build careers. It's about we, the people of the United States. And politics is an extension of the grassroots needs that we, the people, can amplify and present. And I've seen this both the dynamic you described with centrist co-opting movements, as well as successful progressive grassroots movements forcing change on the political establishment. I've seen each of those patterns for 20 years. I mean, just to throw one example out there, when I represented Jason West, he was the only mayor in the country who was ever faced with criminal prosecution for supporting the right of consenting adults to marry a partner of their choice. This was long before marriage equality had been established, 2004. He was a Green Party elected mayor in New Paltz, New York. And every Democrat in the country was screaming, don't do this. And it's interesting to look back because marriage equality is one of the few things that we could say actually represented a progressive advance over the last generation. And it happened because, as Frederick Douglass told us, power concedes nothing without a demand. And I particularly would hope to see labor, organized labor, such that it does exist. I mean, clearly it's lost a lot of ground in the last several generations, and the NLRB has stacked the deck against workers. But to see labor back the institutional Democratic Party at a time when it and the leadership continues to turn, I don't want to use ableist language, continues to bury its head in the sand rather than acknowledge the needs that labor and working Americans are dealing with, that's something that we can revoke. And I say this in the context of having just challenged a corporate Speaker of the House who was endorsed by every labor union across San Francisco, despite her record, and we all know what it is. And I see the organized basis of the left having been co-opted themselves by a Democratic Party that doesn't hold their interests at heart. And so, this invitation to a more adversarial relationship, not just between the squad and the centrist leadership, but between the grassroots progressive base and the careerists in Washington who continue to sell out us, our communities, and our needs. I would like to see more adversarialness there. I think that could be really crucial. And I say this, when we were organizing the Occupy movement 10 years ago, we forced, at the time, many of these contemporary issues into the public sphere. And, people often reflect on the lack of policy movement responding to that era of mobilization. But I see a great deal having shifted since then, right? It was the Occupy movement and the reclamation of public space and the organizing across all layers of society, creating pathways for anybody to get involved, not just policy wonks, not just journalists, but giving ways for barbers and students to get involved. That was the genius and the magic of Occupy. It's one of the reasons we're having this conversation now. It's one of the reasons that Bernie Sanders' campaign found such fertile ground around the country. That escalation of grassroots activism, particularly to include the reclamation of public space, I think of as critical at a time like this. If we were dreaming, I'd love to see, a spreading strike that might reach a general strike. That would also require the support of labor, which, doesn't at the moment.
You're really dreaming, guys. Like, what I want to know is, obviously, it's the same as when we were talking about Force a Vote 2 months ago. Yes, we wish that DSA would throw their weight behind it. We wish the NNU would. We wish, the flight attendants union would. We wish Bernie would. We wish. But I'm not enormously confident that we're going to see a different outcome in this moment than we did in the last moment. And who knows if there's enough time to exert any pressure in this moment. I know some of us are certainly going to try. But what are we supposed to do? Like, assuming this is going to happen again 2, 4, 6 months down the line, whether it's some interim issue or the next reconciliation bill, what on earth has to change before it costs the squad not to do something, before it costs Bernie Sanders not to do something, before it costs, any number of these, the DSA or NNU or any of these institutions that we like and support, but aren't going far enough.
Want there to be a political cost to the DSA?
Yes, I mean that's the thing that got Jimmy Dore in trouble, right? To acknowledge that you have to put some kind of pressure, that it can't just be carrots, that there have to be sticks on beloved, well-liked figures. Gets you articles written up in Vanity Fair about how you're fond of the alt-right and your job isn't to protect the squad and all of this stuff. But that's the reality of what it takes to make political change. We can sit here and hope and pray that on their own volition, they all change their minds and decide to behave differently than they did 2 months ago. Or
that's magical thinking. Yeah.
Right.
It's magical thinking that anything that they will do would be automatic. And I think I mean, just to look at the question that's up there, how can the squad still force a vote? I mean, right now, I mean, sort of it's in the last whatever sort of stages, but it is something that is real. This is not a hypothetical point. The squad can actually hold this up and help to win 15. But it is not going to be simply a tactic in Congress. They have to use that tactic in combination with mobilizing hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the next few days. And it can be done because people want to fight. I mean, really, what people are looking for, what's missing is not an enthusiasm among millions of young people that we should do something. That's clearly there. We are in a changed period than even 5 years ago. What's missing is the real leadership to guide this process. And just to answer that question specifically, what the squad can do and should be doing is using their numerical balance of power in Congress and withhold their vote, refuse to vote on a stimulus bill that does not include $15 an hour, and publicly, talk about how they're going to do it, rally people, organize some actions, call for some actions, tell people to come out in a socially distanced, COVID-safe way. People will come out there. We will be out there. I'm sure all 5 of us will be out there if they call for those rallies. I know a lot of people who fought for $15 an hour in Seattle will be out there. And they should also publicly and boldly and not, they need to go on the offensive. They need to reject all this gaslighting that they're holding up unemployment benefits. Absolutely not. They are the ones who are on the side of working people, both for unemployment benefits, both for and for a stimulus check and for $15 an hour. So put a spotlight on the politicians who are selling you out. That's what's most important that they can and should do here. And at the end of the day, I think it also connects to what Shahid was just talking about, is that we need a genuine nationwide revival of the American labor movement. And that means not only that we need the labor movement to help lead struggles for Medicare for all, for a Green New Deal jobs program. We need the construction trades there on the front lines of fighting for a Green New Deal with clean energy jobs away from the fossil fuel industry, with the right to just transition. But at the same time, we need a root and branch sort of renewal of the labor movement away from what has been prevalent, and Shahid, you were alluding to it, which is a business unionist approach where the leaders of the union and their staff, they do the wheeling and dealing with Congress members or city council members or whatever. They have close relationships with Democrats, and they talk about their own relationships with legislators or their relationships with management. That is a wrong approach. Yeah. You should not be having relationships with them. You should be fighting them because the class interests are not aligned. The class interests of the bosses and the capitalists are not aligned with the class interests of the workers you represent. So we need not business union strategies inside the labor movement. We need a class struggle strategy inside the labor movement, and we need rank and file democracy. And we are seeing glimmers of how this could happen. I mean, obviously we have a long way to go, but the West Virginia teachers' action in 2018, it is crucial. It's a crucial example, not only because they won and it's inspiring, which it is, but it's about how they won. They won because the rank and file leaders remained accountable courageously to the base, to their members, fellow members, and to the community. It's an impoverished community. They all stood together. It was a strategic approach where they built for the strike action more than a year before the strike action itself. They prepared for it. They planned for it. They built community support before they declared the strike action. And then ultimately, when the statewide AFT leaders and NEA leaders decided to take a deal that the rank and file were not happy with, they made a deal with the state legislature. The rank and file leaders showed the real courage where they rejected that publicly and continued their strike action. That's the kind of courage and rejection of this sort of negotiating, wheeling and dealing business union strategies that we need. And we are also seeing another glimmer of hope, which is the rank and file workers in Bessemer, Alabama, who are so courageously fighting for a union. I mean, going up against some of the richest executives and some of the most horrendous anti-union billionaires, to go up against all of that takes a lot of courage. That takes organizing. I know a lot of people are valiantly organizing. Socialist Alternative members are there right now on the ground, and they are reporting tremendous community support for the union struggle and also support in other unions. The AFT union president just spoke on video about how she supports the struggle. The construction trades leaders are supporting it. So there is tremendous solidarity. We need to really build on that solidarity, not squander that solidarity, but build on that solidarity and win more and more victories. But that will only come through a class struggle approach, whether we are talking about $15 an hour in Congress or we're talking about a unionizing struggle.
And I have a lot of gratitude for the organizers, for the rank and file workers who are pushing to make more militant labor unions. I know a few of them, and quite a few of them are also involved in the DSA, and leading the charge for labor activism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, a lot of the leaders, rank and file leaders in the West Virginia teacher struggle, I think, identify as socialists and and have been DSA members. So, there's tremendous potential also to build labor organizing inside the socialist movement. And in fact, history tells us that this is going to be crucial because, what's often thought of as, FDR gave us the New Deal. No, FDR was the guy standing between the capitalists and the pitchforks of the working class anger. And what really led to the Green New Deal was the tremendous general strikes. Shahid, you were referring to all of this. And those general strikes were possible because the labor movement at that time had a tremendous influence of Marxists and Trotskyists who understood, one, that it has to be, class struggle. It has to be a fight. And capitalism poses the struggle in an adversarial way. We are not creating the adversarial aspect of it. It is posed to us as a struggle. So we have to fight it as a struggle, not delude ourselves into thinking that we can find some agreement with the bosses. No, we have to fight against them. And it was that fighting strategy. And furthermore, and this is going to be very important for us in the coming period, what they did, and one of the reasons for their success at that time for the general strikes, is that they built solidarity among the working class, among union members across racial and ethnic differences. They united immigrant workers, white, native-born white workers, black workers. And that is a tremendous responsibility on the shoulders of the left to build a genuine principled solidarity in the working class. And that is also going to be helpful and it's necessary for us to deliver the death blow to far right forces.
I love all that. If I was just to push back in one place discreetly, it would be in the identification of where we expect that cross-demographic solidarity to emerge. I've frankly seen that sensibility in particular lacking in the socialist movement, or at least what passes for it in San Francisco, where DSA in San Francisco is much more concerned with identity politics than actual movement building. And that's a disappointing example of the establishment co-opting the grassroots.
What does that look like, Shahid? Like in practice, what does that?
Establishment? Are you saying that the establishment has co-opted the leadership of San Francisco DSA?
Yeah, I mean, I would point to the smear campaign that targeted me last year as an example of this. The weaponization of false accusations to protect an establishment in which a number of DSA people have career aspirations, and the organization being more concerned with a sort of performative response to identity-based complaints than, for instance, actually doing the hard work of standing against white supremacy. I've seen DSA SF get co-opted in favor of white supremacy.
Who has career aspirations?
Each of the people who smeared me last year, I hired a number of people from the San Francisco establishment who were in DSA, and there was a point in time when they decided, that their allegiances were more to themselves and their careers than the movement. But the point I'd want to make here more strongly is that the cross-racial solidarity, it's already there, and it's emerging from students, and it's emerging from young people. There's a generational opportunity here to circumvent the limits that have frankly divided and conquered our struggles in the past. And the division of class struggle is a conscious stratagem. It's not new, right? I mean, this is as old as colonialism. And the effort to overcome it, I think, has to be not just a political one, it has to be cultural. And it's frankly already started. I mean, as an MC, that's one of the reasons I really have a great deal of pride in the hip hop community and the house community, because these are communities that are very demonstrably multiracial. And the idea of people finding common cause in each other rather than dividing into political camps and then pursuing some sort of constructed vision of tribalism. In some respects, what I'm suggesting here is a less deference to organizational leadership and more grassroots engagement. When we were shutting down Lockheed Martin facilities during the Iraq War, it wasn't because we waited for someone, no member of Congress told us to do that. We were just students who said, this is not going to happen on our watch. And we took direct action. When we filed the marriage equality cases, when we fought police departments around the country over surveillance policies, none of that was invited by an institutional voice. And the deference to institutional voices among grassroots activists. And institutional voices can be members of Congress, they can be local organizations. The point here is we have to get beyond co-opted leaderships, whether they're leaderships in Washington or whether they're local leaderships. This is a profound moment of opportunity if people who are concerned organize independently. The pandemic really complicates this, right? It makes it way harder to do the first step, which is simply to show up. But this is a time when it's absolutely crucial for everyone to show up. And I say that particularly in the context of it being the wake of the election. I think a lot of people last year felt a lot of alarm. They felt a lot of urgency. The moment is no less urgent now, precisely because if the continuing pattern of centrist deference to Wall Street continues in Washington, we can predict what the outcome of the next election cycle will be. And it's going to be one that will not only deject us, but all of the centrist Democrats too. It's when you have control of every branch of the federal government, it's going to be really hard to avoid accountability if those combined Democratic branches can't muster either student debt relief or a decent minimum wage or stimulus payments. I mean, it's across the board that this failure has emerged. And, to Brianna's point, this isn't the end of it. We are establishing patterns right now that will likely persist over the next 4 years. And it makes right now a vitally crucial time for the grassroots to engage. If I may just throw one last sort of like historical reflection on this. I remember very early in the Obama administration, this was one of the first things he did. He tried to close Guantanamo, change the FOIA presumptions, and he came out day one, sort of guns blazing, particularly against the national security establishment. And it was congressional Democrats selling him out in the first weeks of his administration that sent him running to the right wing over the course of the next 4 years, right? It's why one of the reasons why I see the deportations escalating under that administration, the development of drone strikes, the failures to pursue executive accountability over torture. All that got established in the first weeks of the administration because when the incoming president did in that case choose to be assertive, the grassroots weren't there. And right now we see an incoming president declining to be assertive. But if we are there, if we force his hand, if we render it politically untenable for members of Congress to go along with the Biden-Harris deference to Wall Street, I think there could be a very different outcome. And I want to just, maybe this is the last thing I'll say, I'll shut up.
Sure.
Distinguishing Biden from Harris. I don't have any trust, frankly, in either of them. And I have no faith in Biden, but I've seen Harris change her positions. And I don't say that as a reflection of any praise. I tend to think of that as kind of like a weather vanes approach to governance. And that's not necessarily an exciting thing for a principled population or set of people, but it's a very opportune thing in a politician who contrives her positions to meet her sense of what the future will judge her on. And that's exactly why grassroots activism is so important, because we can determine which way the wind blows. We don't need Washington for that.
No, forgive me. You brought up. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Please.
Oh no, go ahead. I'll come after.
I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't remark on this. You brought up unbidden that there were elements in San Francisco DSA that undermined you, defamed you in some fashion for personal political gain. That's a pretty heavy accusation.
Not just personal gain. I mean, it was institutional.
Well, I mean, you mentioned specifically, you said specifically, personal career gain, which I assume means in politics.
Right. But
do you care to say specifically whom you're referring to?
I mean, I could name names, but the more important point that I'd want to raise here. Pardon?
But you won't.
I mean, I can if you want me to. I'm trying to be respectful to those people because they're not running for office.
I mean, it's a serious allegation. I mean,
trust me, the allegation.
As well as it's against an organization that I know a few people from that organization that I like very much, who are very good organizers. So I'm not really sure whom you're referring to.
I had conversations with leaders in DSASF on the labor committee, the electoral committee, other committees at a time when DSA members were making up vicious personal slanders about me, just lies that I'd been inappropriate with volunteers, not a shred of truth, lies that I'd sexually harassed people, not a shred of truth, lies that I was not running to win, there's no truth in that. And subsequent investigations discovered that all of the allegations were untrue. But by the time those investigations, there was some of Brianna's former colleagues who did that investigation at The Intercept, but it took them months to do it. And in the time between, DSA members, and if since you're pressing me, Virgil, I wouldn't have done this unbidden, but some of the names include Jasper Wild, Emily Jones coming out of the Bernicrats, Hemin Cho from the DSA chapter. There were a number of people who were spreading weaponized rumors for weeks in San Francisco. And it wasn't just personal political gain. This is the gloss I want to make clear. It was a political gain for the establishment that they came from, identify with, and continue to seek opportunities from. The local San Francisco establishment has rewarded those people with board seats on local Democratic clubs. The Harvey Milk LGBT Progressive Democratic Club comes to mind. I mean, I can back this up 50 different ways. I've been pleading for journalists to do the investigation for the last year that no one has been willing to do, precisely because performative identity politics has displaced movement building in at least DSASF, as well as other organizations. I've seen this happen on the East Coast. Think about Alex Morse or Hassan Lecky. I'm not isolated here. Unfortunately,
but DSA, so your position is they were rewarded for undermining and attacking and defaming you in particular.
Not a position, it's an observation. The facts bear it out. I'd invite you to investigate, and I'd be thrilled to talk to you about it, though I think we're talking about the fight for 15, not the co-optation of DSA.
We should have a conversation about that and have you back on to talk about that, Shahid. But Kshama, I want you to pick up on the point that you wanted to mention before.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on two things. One is the question that is up on the screen, which is the question of the hour, which is, what should we do if the squad refused to do that? And I wanted to come to that. But before that, just wanted to clarify that I think it's very important, and we have to be very careful here. We should not create illusions in people like Obama and Harris. Harris is very politically similar to Biden, and just because she may be a different kind of careerist and corporate politician than some other careerist corporate politician, that should not be where the discussion is on the left. I just don't think that not only is it not helpful for us to build movements, it actually can be misleading, because then it gets into this whole idea that we need to look at what are the personality differences between different people, and maybe one is more easily gettable than the other. That is not where the fight lies. The fight lies in building mass movements and forcing a concession from all of these corporate politicians. And it doesn't matter what slight differences there are among them. And specifically, also, I wanted to say that could be dangerous to create illusions in Obama. I mean, Obama did the things he did was because from the very get-go, he was very clearly a corporate politician. He was, at that moment, he was skillful in how he presented himself. The consciousness was different. Consciousness has moved, by leaps and bounds since then. And it was not that there was not a movement to back him up, that he didn't do the right things and he went rightward. That is what his agenda was. And I think we have to be very also clear that when we talk about building mass movements and bringing the labor movement and socialist organizations and fighting on a principled basis together on concrete demands, that is not deference to organizations. And I think it is also, to be clear, I mean, absolutely agree with what you said, Shahid, that we should not be bending the needs of our movement and working people to the careerist goals of certain self-appointed leaders or already elected officials. Absolutely, we should fight tooth and nail against that, and we should not give that cover for 1 second. But we also have to understand that, and what history shows, and that's why a serious study of history is very important. And this is something, in Socialist Alternative, we take this very seriously. And the analysis of history shows that it is not it's not it is not that spontaneous movements win the best victories. I was just pointing out one of the reasons West Virginia teachers won such phenomenal historic victories was precisely because they took organizing and preparation and bringing everyone together, creating that solidarity, making sure members were going to stay strong, all of that seriously more than a year before they launched their strike action. And so, I mean, I don't think it reflects accurately what history shows. Obviously, I mean, I completely agree with what Shahid is saying in the sense that, you talked about young people. I could not agree more. I mean, absolutely, there's huge, tremendous hunger for action among young people, and we should not lose sight of that. That is where the organizing is. But that also means that in the labor movement, it's young workers who are wanting to take things in a different direction, in a better direction. And absolutely, that is very important for us to recognize that is where the fight lies. And the other point I think we have to recognize is that the dangers of getting corrupted, co-opted, becoming careerists, starting to look out for yourself, and then selling out the movement, that can happen and does happen at every stage. I mean, it's in the interest of the system and their defenders to relentlessly continue what I would call the carrot and stick policy. They will relentlessly, if you are not somebody who can be bought, they will relentlessly attack you. If you are somebody who can be bought, then they will relentlessly try to flatter you, give you positions, give you accolades, give you money, whatever, this is going to happen. But my point is that doesn't just happen in organizations that are already established and the leaders of those organizations. It will happen in spontaneous movements too. It will happen wherever there are movements, wherever there are leaders in leadership positions, whether they're elected or not. The system will try to grind the movement to a halt by trying to either co-opt or marginalize or attack the leaders. And so in that sense, whether it is a street movement that started spontaneously, or it's a labor struggle, or it's an elected position, we will still need structures of accountability here. And that is why, at the end of the day, I don't think sort of an anti-party approach, like let no organizations, we all individually go out there, we bring our energy. That is, unfortunately, we cannot mislead people. We have a responsibility to speak the truth. And I think that is why we need we cannot have faith in the Democratic Party, but that's why we need our own political organization. We need our own organization, which is not only separate and independent from big business and their interests, but also it has to have structures that enable the rank and file to hold the leaders accountable. I mean, we've just seen, for example, Andre Vasquez in Chicago, who completely sold out the DSA members. He got elected as a DSA member, and that brought up the question of structures. How do we build an organization that will allow the rank and file to hold our elected leaders and hold movement leaders as a whole accountable? Sorry.
I want to continue on that point because I want to know the answer to that. How do we structure our organizations so that we do have that accountability mechanism? Before we do, though, I want to add a newcomer to the stream, Corbin Trent, who worked worked comms for AOC. Corbin, introduce yourself. Tell people what you're doing these days. How should they know you? I'm sorry, I should have a better sense of what your official title was. Oh, we can't.
You're muted. Did you mute?
Yeah. Fine. Yeah, I'm tired of hearing my own voice. I've been doing ad work all day. So so one of the things I'm doing, I've started a PAC with some fellas, the same guys I started Justice Democrats with, and the PAC is called No Excuses. And the idea of the PAC basically is to run ads hitting corporate Democrats and just Democrats that are behaving badly, which is a lot of them, it turns out. And try to knock some sense into them a little bit, try to see if they can't keep a promise or two that they made during the 2020 cycle. And I'm doing a podcast. I'm doing Building the Dream with the same folks. Basically, it's just a trio. It's me, Shoykat Chakrabarty, and Zach Exley. And we've also got, I'm working with a think tank, New Consensus. That was the think tank that helped write the Green New Deal that AOC put in back in the day and wrote that resolution. And I'm doing press for them and comms work. And basically, other than that, just hanging out. So
Corbin, I'm glad you're hanging out with us here. Here's the question.
Yeah.
Even Justice Democrats,
the org or the people?
the group. The
Yeah.
group. Kyle Kulinski, the force the vote moment was a moment where even Kyle Kulinski, as a Justice Dem founder,
Mhm.
found himself objecting to the behavior of Justice Dem candidates because he felt like the purpose of the organization was to be more adversarial than the Congress people were acting in that moment. And now we're in a similar moment. We don't know what they're going to do. We're not overly optimistic in this group, but we are hopeful. And so Kshama's just brought up this question of how do organizations structure themselves in a way that is able to hold the people who come out of those organizations responsible, or beholden to some kind of organizational ideals. What insights do you have, if any, having gone through the process of, founding Justice Democrats, and, how are you feeling about it now?
I think it did some good. I think it's still doing some good. I think it's doing a lot of good. I think that creating a pathway to Congress for people that wouldn't generally have a pathway to Congress is an important thing to do. I think that having, folks that don't have moneyed interest backing them and things like that is a good thing to have representing you in Congress. But that said, just winning. So the original idea was brand new Congress, right? And then that sort of morphed into Justice Democrats. And the reason I think there's a distinction, one of the biggest distinctions was the scale and scope of what it could do. The idea of brand new Congress was replacing as much of the Congress as possible all at once. And the reason for that is just what we were hearing about, which is this sort of gentle decay, right? Once you, and I don't even think it's not a lack of character. It's not, I think it's literally just, the Grand Canyon was created because water ran across it for, millennia, right? I think
that is true.
People, power erodes you, right? I think the system, it's what it does. It just sort of washes away resistance. And unless you can get in there and continually buttress what your capacity to fight against that erosion, then it's going to, you're going to end up, I think, right back to where you were before you started. So I think that you can set up institutions and systems to sort of hold folks accountable. But the problem is when they get more powerful than the institution that put them there, then there's this dynamic that's out of balance, right? And it's a hard thing to do then. So you've got to basically be comfortable hitting up at people that are bigger than you and that can, you just got to be fearless. And that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to get people you can get them to vote against their interests, but it's a hard thing to get activists to act against their interests, And if you've got an organization that's building people up and their entire reputation is built on bringing good people to Congress, it's hard to say, well, these people aren't doing good, because then it's almost like admitting that there's something wrong with what you did. And it's a tough thing to do.
Is it hard to say? Because here's the thing. I don't think that anyone was expecting Justice Democrats to say AOC is trash, we hate her now. Obviously not.
Yeah.
Right. And Kyle Kulinski, who supported Force the Vote, didn't say Justice Democrats is useless and AOC goes in the bin. Right. That wasn't what he was saying at all. What he said was, when we founded this organization, we had an expectation that these candidates would be adversarial in a way that we don't have already. I think that this is something that AOC should do, and we should be pushing her to do it. Now, some of that push, and we should talk more specifically, I think, about what the push looks like, because that was the question on the screen before Corbin came on. But, that push somewhat looks like organizations like Justice Democrats saying, AOC, we believe in Force the Vote. It's NNU saying we believe in Force the Vote. It's DSA saying we believe in Force the Vote, or whatever we want to call this new iteration of it. It doesn't mean we don't believe in anything you've ever done and we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it does mean at least articulating a position and forcing these people, I don't mean to focus it on AOC in particular, but forcing all of them to accept the answer for the choices that they're making.
Yeah. Well, but and I think it's tough. I mean, it's a tough thing to do. It's easier to get one person, I think, involved. So you have 6 in the House now, right? To block any legislation, you got to have 6 of them. So they've got to stand together, not get peeled off. None of them can get peeled off. Obviously, it'd be better if there's a block of 10 or 12 of them that are doing that. And for me, at least, when I watched people folding in, and it's usually because somebody's actually telling them, hey, if you don't stand with us on this, there's, you know, people's lives are going to suffer, right? That we're not going to get, like, let's look at this package right here. If right now, you're right, a handful of House members could block this whole package, right? And probably they would be able, I think possibly they could win this battle over $15 an hour minimum wage. And I think it would be huge for millions of people, right? It'd be transformational. But there's the fear. I mean, we talked about this before. There's the fear that you would lose the whole thing, that it could fall apart, because it could fall apart.
What does that look like? What do you mean by lose the whole thing? And it could also
that you could end up not being able to salvage the $1.9 trillion package. You know, not the entire bill, but there would be big parts of it once you start actually whittling away at this thing, that you could see this, you know, the ball just sort of start to pull apart, right?
Yeah.
And I think people that are really, you know, that really believe in this system and believe in the, you know, the capacity of the government to get in there and do some good things and help people, the people that aren't jaded, cynical Republicans, really think that, you know, it's better to do some good than not, right? And I think that's what happened with ACA, probably. I mean, it'd be.
I want to drill down on this idea of the whole thing falling apart. Because sometimes I think that people say things like this.
Yeah.
And it's not specific, and it sounds good. We're like, oh yes, well, they'll lose political capital. Oh yes, it'll be bad. Walk us through what this looks like.
I don't think you lose political capital, personally. I think you actually gain political capital.
Well, I would tend to agree, but here's the thing. The conversation we've been having is about how everyone agrees that they like everything in the package, including the $15 minimum wage. And when I say everyone, I mean like actual voters and human beings who need money. You know, like actual non-millionaire humans want the whole shebang overwhelmingly in red states and blue states from sea to shining sea. Like this is not a debate.
Yeah,
it's not a debate.
And I think we have to be really clear about the as far as the Democrats are concerned, the cold hard reality for them is they cannot afford to let the $1.9 billion trillion stimulus fall apart, because their whole, I mean, the entirety of their reputation is riding on it. That is why we are calling it a must-pass bill, because Biden is deeply relying on this, because if they don't pass the stimulus bill, they are going to get skewered. I mean, all the illusions will drop immediately in a real sense. I mean, obviously it'll be a long process, but you know, it will be so clear to ordinary people that the Democrats are simply not going to do anything for us. So I don't think that is a realistic question. The real question is the exact opposite, which is that the squad has genuine leverage at this moment, because it is a must-pass bill. So if they have the courage to reject the gaslighting and really go for the jugular of the corporate establishment, they can do it, and millions of people will back them up. And I think that's where the difference lies. And as far as you know, how can we do this? I mean, Corbyn was saying if you can have 10 and peel them off, you know, 10 progressives and peel them off. But look, we have 6 squad members, and they're not doing what they need to do in terms of actually fighting against the establishment, not because they are not genuine, because as I've said many times before, they are, but because the pressures of the Democratic establishment, the establishment as a whole, are way more powerful. And we should not lose sight of the fact that the Democratic Party itself is deeply undemocratic. So they are up against all of that. And unless they create their own base of power, alternate, you know, as a counter to the power of the establishment and Democratic parties, undemocratic practices and structures, they are not going to be able to win. So that's the question. And so I don't know that I don't think it works that if we primary conservative Democrats with progressive Democrats, yes, that's a good thing. And it's a good thing that the squad members have been elected. But the question then still remains, and this is the fundamental question, once the squad members are in power, once the Democratic progressives have been elected, then how do working people, ordinary people, how do the left hold them accountable without an organization that stands with us? We can't hold them accountable with the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is not on our side. So the question of accountability, if we take this seriously, then it immediately brings up the question of a new political organization for all of us. at the end of the day, we also have to answer the question that came up on the screen, which is, what should we do if the squad refuses to do what we're saying, which is withhold the vote? What can we do after that? How can we force them? And I think that relates to this whole thing that Corbin was also talking about. What is it that we can actually do to hold people accountable? I think it really brings up the question of mass movements. We will need mass rallies for $15 an hour. We will need sections, the left labor leaders to call for rallies, really lead this, and then really have a discussion on what kind of political organization we need. I mean, Brianna, you were asking this earlier. Obviously, the question of accountability is very, very important. And I think just some of the things that we have learned through our organization in Socialist Alternative, it's a question of really having a vibrant rank and file based organization where we can debate and discuss and vote on the campaign platforms. And then the elected officials have to be held accountable to those campaign platforms. In Socialist Alternative, there's another aspect that is also useful to share, which is that anybody who gets elected has to commit to take an average worker's wage. And that by itself does not ensure anything. It's not taking a vow of poverty, but it's a question of creating structures of accountability so that you remain in touch with the lives of the ordinary people that you're representing. So even though I get a salary of $120,000 from the city council, I take home only $40,000, and the rest after taxes goes into social justice movements. And it's not a question of charity. We don't do that because we believe in charity, but because it's a way to block careerists from running for office. And the most powerful point, and this is the most paramount for building accountability and having political organizations that can hold leaders accountable, is that we need a politically strong rank and file, a rank and file that is constantly encouraged to study and be on the front lines of organized actions, and because real power comes from being really politically educated and being allowed to play leadership roles.
Well, Corbin, so what do you make of it? Sorry, Virgil, go ahead.
And this is the exact question that I want to ask Corbin Dredd, which is do you believe there's a limit to what PACs, 501c3, 501c4 organizations can do to push elected officials, in contrast to what Councilman Sawant is saying about building a mass working class movement that is not donor based, that is not as like the interest groups that might push politicians?
I mean, I don't know. Is there a limit to what? Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a limit to the accountability that you can get beyond voters and donors. That's a big part of your accountability mechanism, right? And I mean, right now, I think that one of the easiest mechanisms to manipulate for accountability is the media, but it's still not easy. It's still very hard, right? But it's one that the left is really bad at in general, in utilizing. And it's not just, I don't think it's not just because there's the mainstream media that has an agenda. That's part of it, right? But the other thing is that we have this disdain in our movement for the media and for the sort of mainstream media, and I think that costs us, because there's, there is at least in my opinion, you can see their motives, and most of those are profit motives, click motives, right? They're they want to sell things, make money, they want to sell soap, right? And there's ways that we can help them do that and bring our own points out there too. And I think that's how Ted Cruz took a beating on this Cancun trip, right? Now, if he'd done it the wrong time, that would have been a problem. I think this little display with Kyrsten Sinema on the House floor, where she's, basically trying to do the John McCain, which is this new dance she's doing when she votes, is going to hurt her in a couple of years. So I think there's ways to keep utilizing and hacking our media. I just, to be honest with you, I've been around some of the DSAs, and I've been around some of these groups, and it's not my scene. I don't feel comfortable in those environments. I don't. It's not my political home. are places like that. I don't, I'm not members of a co-op. I'm a Democrat. I am a Democrat.
Why is that? 'Cause you're a Tennessee. Where are you from? North Carolina?
Tennessee. I'm from
Tennessee?
Knoxville, Tennessee.
Because you're a down home
You-
Tennessee boy.
you couldn't tell,
I
Bree.
don't know.
Well, you don't have to be from Tennessee. You can just be a candidate of color, and then you'll have the same experience. I mean, I think those are unwelcome spaces for a lot of people.
Today.
Right. So I don't know, I do think that there's obviously, I think that we need a shit ton of reform in our political system. And I think that some of that's going to come through I think we need some more powerful third parties. Hopefully we can get I think we got to create some more political gravity other than just the two parties that are, they've got this sort of nucleus that's the same. Right.
Absolutely. The only thing that I'm trying to get at is you're proposing a particular way of pressuring politicians, which is specifically raising money to non-electoral vehicle and running ads in order to shame people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who Angus King, whoever the hell else.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to get the councilman's view whether you view that as effective or whether you would propose a different style of organizing and pressure.
I'm sorry, Virgil, could you repeat that question? It was static and I couldn't hear.
That's my fault. I'm a very staticky fella.
It's technology's fault.
My view is Corbyn is talking about using very smart people who understand how political communications work, raising money in order to pressure politicians like Joe Manchin, such as by running ads in local media markets. Do you agree with that as a political tactic, or do you believe that there is a larger strategy that would not involve that?
Well, I think tactics like running ads, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. We have run ads in local newspapers, and I agree with Corbyn in the sense that we should use whatever resources we have at the movement's disposal in order to really get the point across to ordinary people who may be winnable to our ideas, but are not politically tuned in for most overwhelmingly because they don't feel politics offers them anything, because they always get sold out. So many people are checked out from politics, especially politics related to electing candidates, because they don't feel like they win anything. But I don't think that is the fundamental question. The fundamental question is not whether we use ads or not. The fundamental question is, are we going to employ a fighting approach to winning what we need to win? And in order to do that, can we use a fighting approach to rally people into using their latent strength, which comes to the surface when they get collectively organized? So at the end of the day, I think technology and other means that media and social media, all of these are means to an end, and we should not be technology Luddites in any way. That doesn't help our movement. So in that sense, I do agree with what Corbyn is saying, but I don't think that's where the barriers are. The barriers are in political organizing and political leadership, and that's where we need to lay the most stress. And that's and I'll just say this in closing because I have to leave. And thank you so much, Virgil and Bree, for being so generous with your time, for having me on. But I think this moment when people are thinking, why is it that we elected the squad members, we know they're genuine, and yet we are not able to win $15 an hour, that all of the stress here is on the lack of political leadership of the right kind. And that's where the debate on the left should continue. And we should discuss concretely how we can win $15 an hour, as a lot of your viewers are asking. And that's why it is a concrete question for labor leaders and other progressive leaders to actually call for rallies on $15 an hour this weekend. I mean, if left labor unions were to get together and call for rallies in a few states on $15 an hour, I have no doubt people will come and support them. And whether we win 15 or not, this time is not the point. If we rally people now, that will empower them to then continue the fight in the future when we can win not just 15, but we have to win Medicare for all and the Green New Deal, and so much is at stake. So thank you so much.
Councilman, the only question that I wanted to ask you is, when are you going to join the squad? But I know you are facing a recall election right now. If you want to tell the audience how they can help you fight back, I think they want to hear that.
Thank you so much, Virgil. I really appreciate you mentioning that. I mean, yes, we have a recall campaign against us from big business and the right wing and the Democratic Party establishment. And everyone who's watching this, it doesn't matter whether you're in Seattle or not, the entire left and progressive movement has at stake to defeat this recall. Because if they use these, undemocratic measures, I mean, it's completely based on, all the recall charges are based on falsehoods. They say I broke the law, but I absolutely did not break the law. But unfortunately, the Washington state recall law is so unjustly written. It's set up to target working class representatives. It's set up to allow wealthy people to get a do-over of the election results that they did not like. So the truth does not matter here. Changing the balance of power is what matters. And that we can only do by empowering the grassroots. So everybody who's watching this, please go to kshamasolidarity.org. That's Kshama, my first name, Kshama, solidarity, one word, .org. Definitely we need your donations, because we don't go to big business. They are the ones who are calling this recall. But we also need your help in other ways. If you want to start discussions wherever you are in the city you're in, if you feel the left and progressive movements there will be interested in defeating this recall, and if you want to organize an online meeting, let us know. We will help you organize it. We will help you, really spread the word. And that is what we need. The left needs to stand against this, because if the recall succeeds, they will absolutely use it as a template to go after left leaders and progressive movements as a whole.
Please go to kshamasolidarity.org. Join me in donating to her campaign fund against this big business Amazon funded recall against her, one of the most effective politicians in the country, and probably the most effective independent politician in the country. Thank you so much for joining us. Love to have you again.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you all, and thank you to all your guests. Appreciate it.
Take
Keep
care.
up the great work.
You too.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night.
Thank you, Corbin, Shahid.
Pleasure.
I want to share something, if I can, on this subject of tactics and accountability.
Sure.
So Corbin's got the strategy around raising money to run ads. Kshama was talking about the need for base engagement, and rallies is one example of a way to do that. I want to just shout out two particular tactics that often get overlooked. One of them is bird dogging, and the other one is, again, reclamation of public space. I want to just give a case study in each of them. So about 2 years ago, I was with a number of young people outside Senator Dianne Feinstein's office. They went upstairs to talk to her about the Green New Deal and their concerns about climate justice. They came downstairs crying because she had been so rude to them. We talked to those students. I went back to work. I had no idea at that moment how viral that video.
Oh, this is the one where she was like, jackbooted tots took over my office.
Exactly. Yeah. And she was incredibly entitled. Senator Feinstein's like, I just won an election. You didn't vote for me. You should listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. It was just incredibly presumptuous and tone deaf, frankly, ignorant of the issues and dismissive of these young people. And young people wielding the powers of cameras and microphones, frankly, are unassailable. I watched Dianne Feinstein is as close to an oligarch or plutocrat as you could imagine. She's one of the wealthiest members of Congress. She's been in the Senate for decades. It was under her leadership of the Senate Intelligence Committee that all of the abuses revealed by Edward Snowden took root. She's as much a creature of the establishment as anyone. And it hasn't necessarily changed her vote, but it shifted public impression of that person. And the using video to shame politicians and expose their records, because one of the holes in the bucket of our democracy is, frankly, that the ranks of journalists don't typically actually conduct exposure journalism of movement voices. And so that kind of engagement of supporters and constituents, forcing electeds on the record, if not through a institutional formal channel like that we'd want to see through votes, then getting them on video is a very compelling opportunity in this moment in time, and reclaiming, but just because we have, so many different online platforms and networks through which to spread that information. And then I want to come back to reclaiming public space. I cited before the example of the Occupy movement in 2011. I want to offer a different one. In 2 successive years, we occupied the ICE office in San Francisco. In 2018, we held the space for weeks. There were wooden barricades preventing any vehicle ingress or egress out of the ICE office for weeks in San Francisco. And that effort to claim public space, to make the dissent unavoidable. And that's the distinction from a rally. Rallies are great. I'm all for them. I've organized a bunch. And they are ephemeral. When our actions cannot be dismissed because they are both in public, and there's a difference between a self-selected action that you have to opt in to participate in or even know about, and the kind of action that forces this, when, Kshama was talking about going to the mat, part of that is about forcing debate, forcing questions that otherwise don't get asked to get asked. When I was arrested in the Senate for asking Obama-era officials questions that nobody wanted to ask or answer, it's about forcing that debate. And that's an incredibly opportune space. When we reclaim public space and we force debate, what happens there is we stretch beyond the ranks even of people who care about politics, because there are a lot of people who are just under the bus but don't know why. And it's in public space that we have an opportunity to not just organize a movement, but to grow a movement. And I've been reclaiming public space for 17 years as a street MC, before, long before running for office. And all kinds of random, amazing, serendipitous things happen when actions take place in public space and they stick rather than, retreat. And I just want to throw those out as tools for our movements to consider, because they don't require any institution giving us permission to do those things. We can do those as we the people without leadership.
Sorry, go ahead, Virgil.
I just want to say very, very quickly to our beloved listener, Microsoft Word technical support. Yes, you did come late and you did miss a solid 2 hours of Kshama Sawant, and it was wonderful. But I hope you will stick around.
So, we just had Ralph Nader on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he made a lot of these points, right? He was basically saying that the younger generation doesn't really avail itself of the opportunities that his generation did to make themselves heard, to force themselves to be heard. One issue, though, that we ran into around the last round of Force the Vote was that the fact of Congress being shut down because of COVID, and now it being even more shut down because of the insurrection, means that there are fewer opportunities to force confrontations with Congress members. The media, to Corbyn's efforts, is very good at ignoring the left. And then you end up in a very tricky, risky space if you go to the place where you're like going to Congress people's homes, because then, especially if you're on the left, you can very easily get characterized as threatening or making vulnerable members, many of whom are subject to a disproportionate amount of physical threat because of who they are or how they've been maligned by the right. So that makes me interested in this moment in particular in what you're doing, Corbyn. And I don't think we've given you an opportunity to really talk about what you're doing with this ad effort. But the question I want to put to you is this: why is an independent organization like yours, or on the other end of things like the Lincoln Project, I mean, they're terrible, but they existed for, a similar type of purpose, right?
Yeah.
Why is it all of this stuff is getting outsourced when it seems to me like the Democratic Party? I mean, is it just because they have like an allegiance to their party member? Like, it seems.
Well, I mean, that's above and beyond. Like that's what they think their entire mission is, right? I mean, the funny thing is, like, Bernie Sanders was treated as a non-Democrat, right? And he's way more of a team player than Joe Manchin.
Sure.
So it's like as long as you keep the D by the name and you raise money, and you do what you're supposed to do, and you pay the DCCC, the SEC, or whomever, and you go with the flow. Then I think that's right. I think that those wings of the those arms of the party apparatus don't attack their own ever, right? Unless their own is a socialist or something like that. Right. Then they will.
Have no problem doing soft swings at AOC or kicking people off of committees or talking about the green new thing or whatever, all that passive aggressive nonsense.
Yes, but I mean, they'll throw shot. I mean, they had Vice President Harris do some stuff in Arizona. To do some interviews in Arizona. They went and talked some shit in West Virginia. So they'll do the swipes, right? They'll signal what they want and what they would prefer you do. They're druthers, but they're not going to put the kind of pressure that, say, a Donald Trump would. If one of his party members was stepping out of line on something he really wanted, then he would first hit the Twitter. Then his people with the PACs would start doing ads, and then next thing you know, they're recruiting a candidate to run against this character. Right. And it's all, whatever. It's all because somebody, didn't do this one specific thing he wanted to do. Right. So what we've been trying to do is say that, hey, this is a 3-alarm fire here. If the Democrats don't take, for one thing, one of my theories on this that I think we can all agree on is that, governing and campaigning are the same basic thing. The point of being good at governing is to help people. And if you're good at helping people, they'll vote for you later, right? And that right now, Democrats are effectively, I think, losing 22, right? I mean, the crazy thing is, if you go back just like a few years, Tennessee, I'm from Tennessee, you mentioned that earlier, right? We have 9 House districts. 2 of them now have Democrats. Before it was 5. Right. It was a majority Democratic state. Al Gore's from Tennessee. Right. He was the senator from Tennessee. The point is that Democrats used to do stuff for people. Right. And that people thought of that. There was a party of the working class, blah, blah, blah. And they produced results for people in their lives, or at least they felt like they did. Basically, they'd done it 40 years ago, but whatever. They were still living off the fumes. Right. Well, our whole point around, no excuses. The thing that we're trying to do is say, Joe Biden, you made some fucking promises. Keep a couple of them, man. Come on, man. How about any of them, right? Yeah. Do put some money, like they're negotiating with themselves as a party, right? And they don't have the majorities. If you've got 70 seats, then negotiate with yourself, right? But you've got 50 in the Senate, and you've got a 5-seat majority in the House. You don't have enough seats to negotiate with yourself. So, it's that's the theory that we're coming from, is that we can embarrass these people a little bit. I mean, like we did, we've done 3 ads now in Arizona, and, we're just getting started, just getting ramped up with it. We're doing an Arizona NPR interview soon, next week. And, I think Arizonans, one thing they like better than Kyrsten Sinema is $15 an hour minimum wage, Another thing, oddly, is John McCain, but whatever, and like she went and shit on all that at once, for whatever reason. So it's also, the other thing that we want to do is expose nonsense. And I thought about this morning, I actually thought about maybe we should do an ad, because I watched this, obviously Cenk just did this video talking about burning some bridges. And then, of course, Jimmy Dore famously did his thing. And then there's the Force the Vote, and all this momentum's been happening around that since January, right?
Some YouTube shit happened.
Huh?
Some YouTube bullshit happened.
Some YouTube shit happened, right? There's some beefs out there, I'm sure. And I read some of it I didn't. But then I thought this morning, maybe we just need to put together an ad that's targeting literally like those 6 people, right? Maybe we just need to put an ad out. Pramila, AOC, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, list out 8. That way we can take 2 alternates if we need to, and say, where y'all at? We need you here. I thought about that as an ad, but then Kyrsten Sinema brought chocolate cake and did the McCain on the floor.
Oh, so you got bought. Is what you're saying, with a slice of cake. Instead.
Yeah, I thought, let's go with
was
cake.
It delicious?
It's a piece of cake.
Was it worth it, Corbin?
It was worth it. I mean, I think you got to kind of go with the flow. If if life offers you lemons, you make lemonade.
Or if a centrist Democrat acts like a right-wing operative on the floor of the Senate, you
got to do it. Right. You got to work with that. You work with what you're given. So,
but given who you are, like sometimes I thought that Kyle coming out for Force the Vote would be a little spicier than anybody in the media took it as, right? But I can imagine that if you got the right people to vocally come out and like name AOC, like if you got people who were very closely associated with her because of Justice Democrats, because of whatever, or with the institution, to say, we actually think you need to act in this moment, that you might end up getting enough traction without spending the time and money to cut an ad, and just lobbying those people or those institutions to come out, assertively about what should be done in this moment might give you more bang for your buck.
I mean, maybe it would, but I mean, I think you also get more. I mean, what I've noticed is just putting out statements versus, spending $5,000 on an ad. You actually get more. You get more press out of the ad buy, right? It doesn't. The thing you're looking for is the press, right? Not the ad buy.
Earned media.
The earned media, and I think that's what people see, and that's what helps generate some. This sort of like this inertia, breaking apart that inertia. So, I do think that how power is built is by using it. I think that's how political power is built. One of the things that I've wanted to see done on the left is get away from Medicare for all and start pushing for VA for all and make Medicare for all the compromise. It doesn't make any sense to me, because if we just do Medicare for all, then hell, we don't have enough hospitals or doctors or nurses or dentists, or we don't have enough any of it, right? So we got to build more of it. So we might as well just make make our position, hey, let's build it all out through the VA. We'll do TRICARE for everybody. And then let the Republicans do Medicare for all.
It's funny that you say that, because when I interviewed Joe Sestak, one of the 30 people running for president last time around, he articulated that exact proposal. Saying,
I should have worked with that guy too.
I want to expand VA hospitals to the degree that they're covering people who do not have access to health insurance, and that's explicitly saying, okay, we want the government to become healthcare providers and not just health insurers. So
that's like the NHS.
Exactly. And after the interview, we were like, wait, was that the most radical healthcare proposal that we've heard out of any candidate? And it turned out it was. But he was an admiral. He came from a military background, so I guess you can say stuff like that.
And I think that's how, AOC was able to move things so quickly in certain areas, right? Whether it's climate with Green New Deal and this sort of like, big moonshot of a proposal, or even if it was, she did this thing on with Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes, right? Where she talks about 70% marginal tax rates and various things. Yeah. And that sort of started a political discussion around tax rates, and I think opened up some space. So, and not for nothing, I think a big part of their political power for the whole squad came from that sit-in. I think that, and because it was unexpected, it was out of character, and it was bold. And I think that's the kind of thing that's just my personal opinion. And I think it's been borne out from time. There is some evidence that it's more than just an opinion, but you do things.
Why aren't they acting like that anymore? Like, do you have any?
That was my question.
Sorry.
No, please.
Everyone wants to know.
I mean, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine.
It's not true. I mean, Corbin, you were.
I don't work there anymore, though, do I?
It's just like a clean break after all of that time. And I mean, I can still get Ari on the phone. I don't work for Bernie anymore.
I can still get Ari on the phone occasionally.
I can also get Ari on the phone. I
think Ari just answers the phone more than a lot of these people. I think. Because there's this idea that seems to be very much of a Democrat idea, that there's a time for campaigning and pushing, and then there's a time for governing. And for me, there's no distinction, right?
Yeah.
Because until you're perfect, until you're till you're done, till everything's fixed, you're always campaigning, because you're always trying to build, and you're always trying to build power so you can build more. But I think there's this idea, like, for example, I read this New York Times op-ed by Ezra Klein, I believe is the guy's name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's talking this horse shit about how great it is that Biden is the anti-Trump, and he's got his head down, his mouth shut, not doing, he's just doing the work. He's doing the work.
Doing the work to screw over the working class.
Yeah. You even, like, let's say, all right, so they did do some really great shit with the vaccine, right? They got Johnson & Johnson out there now. They've got some folks, Merck, working with Johnson & Johnson to, they're putting down some IP problems so they can make more. They've got it ramped up, blah, blah, blah. But even that, they're not taking any credit for it. Like, part of what they're supposed to be doing is rebuilding people's faith in American institutions and American government, right? Mm-hmm. Since Ronald Reagan, we've been at war with the idea that the government can't do shit and the government's bad, right? Yeah. And so part of your fucking job is to represent the government. Go out, when Ezra Klein's like, oh, he's just keeping his mouth shut and doing a good job. I have no idea what he sounds like, but, and I think that's completely wrong. That's completely wrong. You should be out there. Be the anti-Trump requires you to be a salesperson in chief. You got to go out there and get people excited about the mission at hand, about the job we're doing, whether it's vaccinating people, getting healthcare to people, rebuilding the economy, getting people better wages, getting people out of the tent cities behind the fucking Walmart here in Knoxville, whatever it is, get people pumped. But instead, they think their job is to, just sit back and, it's none of your business, guys. You out here in the world shouldn't have to worry about your government. You all just go back to the gym and go back to brunch. We've got this. And that's, I think, terrible.
Well, Biden hiding from the press doesn't help here either. I mean, it requires, you'd hope, the standard bearer for the party, not only to be a public advocate, but I want to go back to the point you all mentioned when the sit-in happened. Right after the squad, version 1.0 goes to Congress, there's the sit-in at Pelosi's office to force the Green New Deal into the public conversation. That wasn't very unlike the young people who went into Feinstein's office. Mm-hmm. You can do a lot by shaming public officials in their space. And, to Brianna's point about how it's tough to get to them now, totally true. The place that politicians are most vulnerable is their fundraisers. And mm-hmm. those are incredibly politically lucrative places to raise questions. When Pelosi gave Donald Trump $4.5 billion for his border concentration camps with no mm-hmm. protections for human rights, we confronted her at a fundraiser the next morning. And these are, the video didn't get out in the way that we, might have hoped, but like, that's the opportunity that confrontation that is civil, grounded in issues, but that brings to the public these conversations that otherwise happen within closed doors. I want to also just expand the conversation in one direction. We were talking before about how do organizations hold incumbent politicians accountable. And there was a question also about how do we hold organizations accountable so that they don't end up, undermining the purposes of their own members. I want to just go back particularly to the Sunrise Movement here. Incredibly inspiring organization, made hundreds of thousands of phone calls for various campaigns, including Bernie's around the country. They were the ones who organized the sit-in at Pelosi's office when AOC first went to Congress. And where was the Sunrise Movement last year when Pelosi faced an advocate for the Green New Deal in the general election? Not on the field. And so part of this is about getting our elected representatives in the squad, the folks that we do have in Washington that are aligned with the future, getting them to be more aggressive. Part of this is also about just getting the organizations to show up. The same observation I made about Sunrise Movement, I could make about Brand New Congress or Justice Democrats or Our Revolution. There are all kinds of organizations that are building support based on principles that they then prevaricate. It's one thing for electeds to do that, but when you see grassroots organizations,
that's the frustration. That's why Force the Vote, the part that hurt wasn't that AOC didn't listen to me. That's the narrative that somehow we thought that we had a direct line to the Congress people and they had to do whatever we wanted. No, that's, it was always about persuading them. The part that stung was these institutions, some of which I belong to personally.
Right.
Not only just kind of not doing the thing, but not taking steps to even take the temperature of their rank and file.
Yep.
Right. I don't know if people agree or don't agree with me over Force the Vote. All I have is the internet as a metric. But, if the DSA puts out a poll and doesn't really publicize it, and then the poll comes back with only 28 people responding, but 20 out of those 28 are for Force the Vote, I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. Right? It's just enough information to suggest that they are something for them to gain by not plumbing the depths of what their membership actually wants. And again, I don't know, but the fact that there are mechanisms in place to take those metrics, to take those barometers and do it quickly is in itself an institutional problem. Go ahead, Corbin.
There's this fear that if you fight and lose, that you lose something, right? And I remember, so there's a couple of groups that fight in the women's, in pro-choice sphere. NARAL, and then there's another one.
Now,
Yeah, maybe, I don't remember. Anyway, there's two of these big pro-life, pro-choice groups that are, NARAL's one of them, and there's another. And I remember Planned Parenthood, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, definitely Emily's List may have been it. Anyway, we were working on some stuff on the Hill on. This is when they had the House, but not the Senate, and a lot of all the legislation that was being worked on in the House, written by Democrats, had Hyde Amendment stuff in it, right? It had all that language written in by Democrats into the bills. Why? Because they were, it was what the Republicans, they wouldn't vote for it otherwise, so we had to go ahead and put that in there, sort of.
Can we just unpack what that is for folks who might not know? Repealing the Hyde Amendment would enable women to gain access to reproductive planning services using public dollars. Yeah. And part of that would be abortion, right? Right now, for example, if you're super low income, or actually low income, really, you basically just don't have access to abortion, right? In a lot of states. So it's basically, there's a wealth gap. And Democrats were keeping that in place. And so we in the office and in the movement circles really wanted to push that out. We wanted to push that out of the Democrats' language. And we got pushback from the organizations that were actually out there on the front lines of this fighting for it. They were like, don't do that. Don't do that. And then we're like, why in the hell would these people not want us to do that? Well, they said, well, we don't want to embarrass because some of the Democrats won't go along with it, right? Some of the Democrats will vote against that if you try to take the language out, because there was amendments you can use to strip language out. And if we did that, then they said it won't win and it'll look like we were losing ground. Well, then you are losing ground, right? Why don't we expose these problems? I mean, it's literally the exact same thing you're talking about with force to vote, right? It's the same thing. It's the exact same story I encountered 15 years ago when we were organizing marriage equality cases. I got the same.
They don't want to expose it.
Lambda legal. Yeah, they didn't want to assert because they were more concerned. Insiders were more concerned with guarding position than asserting. And one thing that strikes me as we're having this conversation, whether it's labor unions, whether it's the Hill, whether it's national organizations, in each of these cases, what we are basically observing is the dynamic and the tension between insider-driven politics and populist-driven politics.
And power, people understanding of power. There is this, literally, it all reminds me of this analogy of, if we tax billionaires in New York City, they're all going to move to Guam, or I don't know where the fuck they're all going to move, right? Or maybe they'll all move to Morristown, Tennessee. All the billionaires and millionaires from New York City will just move to small town, they'll move to Greenville, North Carolina. That's where they'll all go. And, there's this politics of fear. Everything is coming from this basis of fear. They're about to leave, all the business owners will leave America. All the good Democrats that are supporting pro-choice positions will then just sort of abort us and leave us, whatever. Right. And it's not, I don't think it's the way to build power. I think you build power by doing shit.
Yeah. I remember, I got to say, back in 2016, remember when Bernie, this happened. So Hillary Clinton supported the Hyde Amendment, right? Hillary Clinton, I said that wrong. Tim Kaine supported the Hyde Amendment and Hillary Clinton picked him as VP, right? And so there was this conversation that happened at some point about how Hillary has supported in some way in the past. And all of these women's reproductive rights groups endorsed Hillary Clinton. Right. And Bernie Sanders, his entire career, had been much more unequivocal about a woman's right to choose since like 1972, when it was legitimately a far left crazy commie position. And it took some political risk for him to do that. Meanwhile, back when Hillary Clinton was, a Goldwater girl, Bernie Sanders, literally the same year, Bernie Sanders was out here talking about a woman has a right to choose, and writing some compelling essays about how sexual fantasies are unduly influenced by rape culture. And I remember when, I think it was Now, one of the groups endorsed Hillary Clinton, and there was a little bit of pushback, and they had to put a little caveat on the endorsement. But I remember that was one of the moments that really radicalized me, because Bernie said, those are the establishment groups. Establishment groups are going to endorse the establishment candidate. And of course, that became the sexism cycle of the week. Oh, Bernie Sanders calls Planned Parenthood establishment. How dare they? Blah, 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 blah. And so hearing this story, Corbin, about how they were literally opposing stripping the Hyde Amendment out of these bills,
Like
it would
really
make
strongly
the
opposing
Democratic
it.
Party make them look bad. You shouldn't be giving anybody $1 of your money who does
What
that.
they said was, we got a 10-year plan. We got a 10-year plan, and this
Just
would
like
disrupt the
Solid.
plan. This fucks the plan. Don't fuck the plan. You know, it's sort of like who else has a plan? QAnon. They have a plan. You gotta trust the plan, man. And their plan is going to work out about as well as the folks that are fighting for your rights as a
Hell, maybe
woman's
better.
right to choose.
They've got quite an organization going on over
Because
there.
the shit's eroding. Our rights are eroding all across this country. You know, I mean, if people, I was reading, I don't know, a few years ago about some police, they were doing a no-knock search warrant on a house for marijuana. They throw a flashbang through this is in Georgia, I believe. Throw a flashbang through a window, blow open a kid's chest.
Yeah.
Anything happen? Wrong house, it turns out. Wrong house. Yeah. My bad, they say. They leave. And then, no accountability, right? So the point is, like, if these extremes that are happening in our society can't even be, warning signs for us, and we say, okay, we're going to have to do something. And then we get the seats of power and we say, hey, we can't disrupt things because it could be embarrassing for our team. Right. And it could not just be embarrassing for our team. That's not the thing that scares them most. Our team will leave us. Right. They will leave us and go join the other team. Like when I run ads pushing back on Cinema and Manchin right now, I get hate mail about it. I get fucking vicious hate mail. And the thing is, the core is you're going to make Manchin become a Republican. You're going to make Manchin become a Republican. He's going to switch teams.
He is a Republican.
He's a Republican that caucuses with the Democrats.
Well, what happened with Paula Jean swearing in? Remind me, did the Democrats wait first before I say this? There are a lot of you still here with us, and so I haven't said this yet. I hope you all like the channel and subscribe to the channel. We put out a lot of really substantive clips from our episodes. We're one of the few podcasts that's putting out reliable video content. If you want this stuff to go farther than some of the stuff you're seeing from other channels that maybe isn't as ideologically consistent, make sure that you're subscribing here so we get the traction and the clicks and all of this, the algorithm-y stuff. Okay. But my question was going to be, what happened with her? First, fresh my memory. Did the Democratic Party weigh in at all in that race, which obviously, had she won, we would be in a different position now.
Race, when she ran against
in
the primary, or when she was the nominee?
No, when she ran in the primary, not against the Republican candidate, against what's his face?
Against Manchin? No,
Manchin.
That didn't weigh in. Not much. I mean, she says now that they did weigh in some, and I guess they did some, but that was back in the brand new Congress Justice Democrats original days, and it was a tough time. We had, I think, endorsed at that point 74 candidates or something, and maybe we were going to be able to raise 1.4 million or something. We had 13 candidates we were trying to help that we actually recruited. One of them was running for a Senate seat against Joe Manchin. Justice Democrats couldn't do much, and she wasn't able. She didn't catch fire fundraising wise, right? And couldn't compete fundraising. She ended up with 34% of the vote. A real respectable number.
I'm not even talking about you guys. Like, it's not even like
I'm saying that's why her campaign. She wasn't able to get her campaign going.
The Democratic Party. This is one of those things. The Democratic Party doesn't get to run around hand wringing about how they can't do anything because Joe Manchin exists. Right. If they didn't support a meaningful primary challenge against him 3 years ago. That's my point. I'm not even I think it's admirable that groups like Brand New Congress or what have you try to weigh in and help. But part of my issue is it shouldn't fall on you. The Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party thinks they're gonna. But here's the Democratic Party's West Virginia's theory on things, right? They're gonna keep going with Joe Manchin. The other thing I get is Joe Manchin is a unicorn. Right. He has he has the unique attributes, even though 10 years ago, both the senators from West Virginia were Democrats. And then for a generation before that, both of them were Democrats. Now he's the only Democrat left in the entire state of West Virginia that can possibly win a statewide election. That's the thing. I mean, I could read you a dozen emails that said the same stupid shit. And, if that is he has been losing ground. Right. So in 2012, he won by 25 points. Right. In the general. And in 2018, his last election, he won by 3 points, just like Claire McCaskill, just like Landrieu, just like a lot of the Democrats all across the country. I mean, you go back to Obama's first term, we had 60 seats and we got 50 now. It means we lost 10. That's 10 Senate seats that used to be Democrats, right? We had both West Virginia seats. We had Alaska. We had Florida. We had Louisiana. We had Iowa. We had all these things as a part of the Democratic Party. That seemed like they seem unwinnable now, right? They're like, well, you can't win there. That is gone. That's a godforsaken Republican country over there. Fuck that place. Why even compete?
And moreover, the narrative is you absolutely can't win because of progressive policies. It's the exact like they use our slim margins and our dwindling numbers as justification for doubling down on neoliberalism.
When the irony is, if they ran on progressive platforms, they'd actually have chances at capturing some of these seats, right? Medicare for all is a bipartisan majority favored position across the United States. Like we're describing, the fight for 15, supported by a majority of 61%. I think we see in the Democratic Party a politics of fear and risk aversion remixed with that insider politics process, and all of those things together constrain assertion and bold demands. And I think it's precisely when we make bold demands that the Overton window in public opinion shifts. You know, one of the questions, I think, a hole in the bucket here is the timing. You know, we live in the United States of amnesia, and for the moment, you know, Manchin's a household name. People recognize that he's a Republican caucusing with the Democrats. Will they remember the next time he's up for election? And so, you know, this gets back to the point of, are we only campaigning during election season, or does campaigning, as it were, you know, making the public case for policies that support the future and the American people, that needs to be a year-round process, precisely in order to maintain this culture of accountability instead of a culture of deference.
Yeah. Can I say that every time? Sorry, go ahead, Corbin.
I was going to say, if I wanted to win in West Virginia, if I wanted to rebuild the brand of the Democratic Party, I'd be fighting tooth and nail for 15 an hour.
Hell yeah, you would.
Tooth and nail.
Yeah.
I would be.
It's so, and here's the thing. They were so coordinated. Democratic Party never gets their coordinated messaging together. Like they're flailing around like freaking monarch butterflies in a sonar zone. But when it came to the day after Joe Biden won, it became, oh my goodness, you know, all these progressive policies caused us to lose seats in the House. Mm-hmm. Now, I will give credit to the progressive media, which has subsequently become divided, but at the time was very forceful in pushing back. AOC leading that charge, really laying out the facts about how none of the Medicare for all candidates lost their seats. They were all blue dogs, and we were able to largely win that battle. But in the days since, we still got the Claire McCaskills in their MSNBC slots going on every day and casting aspersions on the idea that everybody in America right now doesn't desperately need a $15 minimum wage. We've been talking about it in a little bit of abstraction, which I understand, and we presume a lot of our listeners know the facts. But a $15 minimum wage would bring 50% of Black Americans out of poverty, 50% of the Black people in poverty out of poverty. And Kamala Harris is sitting here with her Shirley Chisholm colors and like slogans without ever being held accountable for that by anyone in the media, not our Black leadership, not our Al Sharptons, not our even lefties like Jesse Jackson. Just everybody's silent on those kinds of issues. To me, sometimes the media battle isn't even about these candidates. Even DSAers during the last cycle of Force the Vote, every time I would bring up the overwhelming popularity of Medicare for all, leftists were arguing with me, it's not that popular, actually. It's not that popular. Stop saying it. Don't say 88%. I don't give a damn what number you use. 88%, 76%. The overwhelming majority of Democratic voters support Medicare for all. You said it yourself when Bernie Sanders was running, and now that it's not part of your brand, I guess, you have stopped saying it. But that is the part that's demoralizing. That when Joe Khanna comes on our show and pretends, you know, and I respect the fact that he was willing to come on and submit to this. But if I ask you the question, why aren't the proportion of Democrats in the House commensurate with the proportion of Democratic voters who support Medicare for all? And why aren't the percentage of people who support Medicare for all in the House the same? And the answer is, I think my colleagues think it's a losing electoral issue for them.
Yeah.
You either think your colleagues are stupid or you know they're lying. And it's incumbent on you to call them out for lying.
Yeah. That's a really hard thing to get them to do. That right there, that is such a critical thing, I think. And that's another place where you build power with people, right? And it's about this inside outside strategy. I think it's a big part of it, right? And because the things that do build you power on the outside don't do much for you on the inside. You know,
You don't have any power on the inside either. Look at what happened to all of them. Their committee appointments. Okay.
But
Also,
one day, they're going to give you power. Just
exactly
be nice.
Right. Let's play this out. Let's play out. All of them said we're not going to vote for Pelosi. Let's play out. All of them say they're not going to vote for the $15 minimum wage. Whatever. What's Pelosi going to do? What's she going to do? She's going to say, I'm going to strip every committee appointment from AOC and Rashida Tlaib and everybody else who's on the cover of Teen Vogue and everybody loves, yes, Queen, women of color. Yeah. She's going to sit there and publicly look. I'm not saying she's not going to do stuff, but there are limits to how far she can go because of the popularity and, frankly, the identity politics game the Democratic Party has been playing that insulates those people to a certain degree. And already, if you're losing out on essential seats like Katie Porter in the Financial Services Committee, what's the marginal difference between what there is to be lost and what there is to be gained? They're not going to strip. Right. They're not going to strip all of her committee appointments like that racist woman. What's her face with the gun?
Marjorie Green Taylor.
Yeah, they're not going to do that. And
one
also,
of the things I thought
doesn't give a damn. She didn't care. She's like, great. I'm fundraising off of this. I'm gonna bring 2 guns next time.
This point that you're raising about the delta, and part of the point there to grip is that we're not getting much at the moment through the insider game. You know, the insider track has demonstrated that it has effectively no influence, or at least not enough to move policy. So why wouldn't we then turn to the set of levers that, when we've pulled them in the past, have gotten things like, I'm thinking here of everything from Social Security to the weekend to women's suffrage to every war that we managed to have ended. I'm thinking Vietnam in particular. All of that came through grassroots activism, not from Washington. And that history of social struggle forcing the political branches to show up for work. The civil rights movement comes to mind. That wasn't the brainchild of Democrats in Washington. That was a demand from people on the street, multiracial coalitions putting themselves and their communities at risk to demand basic rights, and the shame and the visibility combined to coerce Congress and the administration, LBJ in particular, into showing up. And, we should learn from that history rather than forgetting it. Just because we have a toehold in Congress doesn't mean that any of us, whether it's organizations or individuals, should be deferring to those leaders. I think back to the apocryphal story about A. Philip Randolph and FDR, where FDR goes to the White House and A. Philip Randolph, the Black labor leader, head of the Porters Union, comes to seek a reform, and FDR says, "Yep, I agree with you. Now make me do it." And I think a lot of our allies in the grassroots need to recognize that we are the leaders that we have been waiting for. We don't have to wait for people who've won elections to show up. We can lead them by articulating demands. And I think not just articulating demands, but pointing out precisely the point that you raised, Brianna, which is the insider track without the outside heat, it hasn't gotten us much.
Yeah. I think it's 100% right. You guys are amazing. We're coming up on 11 o'clock, which I think is probably a nice natural end. That's a good
round number.
I'm sorry?
It's a good round number.
It's a good round number. Human beings have this weird attachment. There's like a whole science of how much we lose in our life because we're attached to round numbers. Time, we're like, I got to procrastinate for 15 more minutes because it's, 12, 50, 45. Rounding off prices and all this kind of stuff. But I want Virgil to come back, but Corbin, I didn't give you an opportunity to tell people how they can support your efforts and find your work. And then Shahid, I guess I didn't with you either. So go to it.
Happy to get there. Corbin, after you.
Oh, okay. Certainly. Well, so you can find the podcast at Building the Dream, I guess, wherever you listen to podcasts, Building Pod on Twitter. And then noexcusespack.com is where you can go see like the ads that we're working on. And if you follow me on Twitter at Corbin Trent, then you'll see all of that because I'm a big self-promoter. So I'm shameless.
And for me, folks can learn more about my work as an advocate. I'm exploring the possibility of running again in 2022 to replace Pelosi. And you can learn more or support the campaign at shahidforchange.com. shahid.us. I'm also on all of the social media networks, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I just joined Clubhouse last week at Shahid for Change.
Corbin, you and I had a little encounter on Clubhouse the other day.
Yeah.
Serendipitous little meetings that keep popping up. Virgil, maybe you and I should start a bad faith Clubhouse room.
Is that how it works? I haven't the faintest idea how it works. I just know
Super simple.
People talking with each other on the internet, and you know how much I dislike doing that. But
go ahead.
But I'm happy to do it with you, Bree.
I will hold your hand through it virtually, of course, because of COVID and the fact that we live in different states. But the beauty of it is that it's like a podcast where people can participate and like listeners can ask questions. I think that's the best way to think about what it's adding, because some people are like, oh, it's a podcast, but it's not edited and it has random people and it's not planned, so it's worse. Which, yeah, sure. But
you know how much I love getting questions from the audience.
Well, here's the thing. I was in a Clubhouse room a couple of days ago. I saw, because you get pinged when someone you follow starts a room. So I saw an alert that Cenk was in a room. So I went in the room out of curiosity, and he ended up on a panel. He was on stage, and then Christine Pelosi got pulled onto the stage. So at the time, Cenk was criticizing like money and politics or something. That
Christine Pelosi?
And then here comes Christine Pelosi, and I'm like, what's about to happen? Because people don't like crosstalk a lot. Like they don't talk over each other. It tends to be one at a time. So I was like, is anyone going to address this? And then I ended up getting pulled up onto the stage, but after Cenk had left. And I didn't really have an opportunity to address Pelosi directly. But there are all kinds of opportunities for
What you mean when you say pulled onto the stage? Like I could just be listening to something?
Well, no.
And it's like when you're at an awful play and the actors come into the audience and force you to do something.
I mean, you don't have to participate, but like, for example, when I joined Corbin's room, if you are followed by one of the people on stage, they can see that you've entered the room and they are inclined to bring you on because you're friends,
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what, I don't know who there brought me on, but it was someone who recognized and knew me and wanted me to get messy in there. So,
well, I think that us streaming on YouTube has been a massive success. But if you'd like to take the show on the road to Clubhouse, I'm with you, Bree. You just, hold my hand and lead the way. I just want to make one note here from our friend Microsoft Word technical support. I actually have a bunch of personal questions for Virgil. I don't think the audience knows him well enough. I will accept questions from you and literally no one else. Because you've been with us from day one, my friend.
Okay. Well, Virgil, if you want to hang around and do fun time portion, I'm willing to know.
I can do a little fun time portion with Bree.
Okay, well, I will not subject Corbin and Shahid to that. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Real honor to be with you this evening.
This was great. This was a really good conversation. I appreciate it. Very substantive.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Have a great night. Keep up the great work.
Take care. Have a great night. The people saying that I'm drunk. No, I'm not drunk. I just have not eaten in, I'm gonna say 8 hours.
Well, I think that you should remedy that, Virgil.
Well, I made a delicious Italian sausage. I guess in some parts of the country they call this a hoagie. With what you call it?
Sorry, I can hear you.
Yeah, I know you can. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, I know it's really more for the audience than for you, Bree. You don't have to actually hear this. There's onions involved, and I was going to take a picture and send it to you, but I think I ate it too quickly. But it was very good.
So you sent me a picture of a scallop pasta dish that you made the other day that was genuinely impressive.
Yeah, I can impress. When people have faith in me and my abilities, I can do good things.
Virgil, did you see that I tried to shade you about the egg stuff in my first?
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, and I did the I did the mature thing and I ignored it. Ignored the shade. Not taking the bait.
Do you feel like you learned something?
I learned nothing. No, I mean, my procedure for making eggs is already unimpeachably perfect. So
Okay, well, I for those who enjoyed Egg Discourse, I need you to reward us for making fools of ourselves in that way.
we
I
did
need
not
you
make
to
fools of ourselves. I mean, if
reward my
anyone
co-creators.
who disagreed with my egg process was a fool, as far as I can tell.
I need you to pay it forward by liking this page, by subscribing to this page, by sharing our videos. I couldn't check if it worked, but I tried to set this up to stream on Facebook simultaneously. Guys, we have a Facebook page now. It's a real pain in my butt to manage, so please follow it or else I'm
I
going to
have nothing to do with it because I'm permanently banned from Facebook from trolling people too hard on it. But Bree is in charge of it. Maybe the page gets bigger and we can find someone to moderate it who's not us, so that Bree isn't in the hot seat all the time. I'm just I'm sorry that I can't help you on that one, Bree.
It's okay. All I want is for these people to follow us on Facebook and share the video. We make all these like short clippable videos so that you can like share them with the people in your life that need to hear the arguments.
You mean old people? Yeah, old people. Yeah.
I mean,
That's who's on Facebook, old people.
I also really like this idea because Virgil, I sometimes feel really pinned in. Like I feel like I can't express the full diversity of my personality, of my interests. When I was early on Twitter, I used to be able to talk about all kinds of things, fashion, food.
Before you were a notable famous person.
And now, like, I feel like if I'm not talking about politics, there's some people who will always barge in and say, "Oh, you've been spending too much time. There were 60 seconds went by and you didn't say,
Oh, those people have to shut the hell up because they're wrong. I always want you to talk more about non-politics stuff because I am far too familiar with politics stuff, and it's in my brain. It's like it's like a parasite, and I hate it. And I hate explaining politics to people. I hate understanding things. And, I just want to talk about whatever's on Bree's mind. That would be my honest to God preference.
Well, in the world where we were able to be together again, I think it would be low-key fun to do a cooking show episode because there is something about cooking that distracts you just enough to give you something to play off of.
That's the AOC strategy.
Right. Like
Yeah.
we should follow our example.
I don't want people to see how badly I manage my kitchen, so I would prefer if you were the one doing the cooking and I would sit there, in another city and just, give you instructions on what to do.
Mansplain cooking to me.
Yeah, I would like to mansplain it. If Microsoft Word has any questions for us, we're just standing by waiting for you.
This is an interesting question. Someone's asked why don't we monetize our YouTube channel and not make people pay for Patreon? We would not make hardly any money at this point from monetizing our YouTube channel. So I think
like running ads. Yeah.
That would be a lovely idea, but you need to take our subscribers from like 33,000 to like hundreds of thousands.
I would also I do want to give a serious response to this, which is that, when we started the show, it was always supposed to be just a podcast, and the visual stuff and the streaming, that all evolved from the original concept. And we still have the basic, business idea that all of these operations are going to be subsidized by a Patreon, with the basic Patreon model of doing premium episodes in addition to free episodes, and that's going to pay for me and Bree and our producer Ben and the equipment that we need to purchase. That could change, but we'll have to figure it out, I suppose.
Yeah, but we appreciate those of you who are patrons. I really do think that we are working hard. I know it's like not cool to say that you try sometimes in this like
not cool in the slightest.
I try very hard. We are putting work and thought into these episodes and what issues we're going to cover. Monday's episode is going to cover these Amazon protests. You know, we're trying to be not just interesting, but useful. And that's a difficult balance to strike. We want to be fun, we want to be entertaining, but we want to feel like we're moving the conversation forward in a way that doesn't always feel like it's happening on the left. And so we really appreciate those of you who support us in our ability to do this, because we all know that if we had to take certain kind of traditional media jobs, which is what is expected of at least me in my position, I wouldn't have.
You're capable of that. I'm not.
Wait, what?
That you're capable of taking a traditional media job, and I'm not.
Well, not exactly. It's not exactly like, you know, they've been knocking down my door, although there is a thing that I'm about to start doing that hopefully will give me some access to a little bit of a mainstream audience. So I'll let you know about that when it actually happens. That's all to say, we really do appreciate you. I know that times are tough, and we don't take it lightly, and we appreciate your suggestions. I've been a little bad on the inbox lately because some of you aren't super constructive, and I got to say it does wear on me a little bit. Like, I will answer more emails if you guys try to be a little bit nicer. Like, say what you mean, but like, you don't have to be an a-hole about it. And I will be more responsive in the Patreon channel.
Alternately, you could send us no emails, and then we wouldn't have to worry about the matter ever again.
That is an alternative. Also, we're going to start a Discord soon, and so you can hurl your invectives at me.
No,
there.
that will get you banned. We will start a Discord, and we will find some people to moderate it.
Yes. And we're going to do Twitch. We're going to do all of the things. Just give us a second. Remember, we've only been a podcast for what, 6 months? November, December.
Oh my gosh, September.
Yeah,
6, 7. Yeah. Wait. Was it? Do we just pass the 6-month anniversary?
February 10th. No, March 10th. It'll be March.
Oh, that's
10th.
coming up in 5 days.
Yeah, we had not even 6 months. We just did we hit the 50 episode mark a couple episodes ago. Like, big things have happened really quickly, and it's because of you. So thank you. Retweet the podcasts when we tweeted on Twitter. Rokana said part of why he wanted to come on the show is because he sees so many of our videos in his timeline. That's helpful. Do you have anything else?
We did, honestly, we did the best Rokana interview. A bunch of people did some, and they were kind of bootleggy, but we actually put his feet to the fire, and I like that. I like that's something that you and I can do with our good cop, bad cop, or should I say good faith, bad faith kind of act.
Yeah, I like it. So if all 1,166 of you who are still here haven't already liked this video and subscribed to this podcast, shame on you, pox on all your houses, but actually you could just do it now. And thank you for listening to this.
In the future, we'll monetize this and hit you up for cash. Straight cash. I mean, doing a Twitch stream and getting people subscribed to your Twitch stream and pay for bits to use in Twitch stream so they can use custom emojis and things like that in the chat. That's a very valuable way that people communicate nowadays.
Okay, well, we're working on that. You guys are awesome. And as always, we want you to
keep the faith.
There it is. All right.
Love.
Much love. Bye, guys.
Take care.